The head chef storms over, demanding to know what Wujun's latest creation is. With a surprisingly serious expression, Wujun looks his boss square in the eye and presents his dish, ratatouille. His boss is immediately ticked off, pointing out that Wujun used yuzu instead of tomatoes and, well, ratatouille. Wujun just shrugs, insisting that he's pretty sure ratatouille is just better with yuzu. The chef takes a long, slow breath, clearly trying to keep his cool. He tells Wujun to knock it off with the weird experiments and get back to chopping vegetables, since his knife skills are out of this world. He wraps it up by telling Wujun to just try and do a normal job next time. Just as he's about to move on, asking who's next for their review, another employee suddenly starts screaming at him, calling him an arrogant fool. The guy yells that he has no right to talk to the celestial demon that way, and that he should get on his knees and beg for forgiveness. Wujun sighs internally, thinking about how his old servants used to pull stunts like this all the time, and how his legendary cooking skills from his past life are totally useless here. Turns out, in his previous life, Wujun was the celestial demon king, a conqueror of countless realms. But honestly, Wujun admits that taking over the Central Plains was never really his thing. Wujun had just whipped up a plate of fried spicy peppers for his loyal servant as a thank you gift, revealing that the only reason he conquered all those lands was because they were getting in the way of his true passion. The elders watching him cook were getting super nervous, seeing yet another one of the celestial demon's strange culinary inventions. And then it's revealed. Wujun's ultimate dream was to become the greatest chef in the Central Plains. He was reborn in 2011, right after his parents were tragically killed in a gate accident. The protagonist was adopted by his friend's parents, who raised him like one of their own, even with a child of their own. But tragedy struck again when his adoptive father also died in a gate-related incident. That loss hit Wujun hard, triggering the return of all the memories from his past life. Back in the kitchen, Wujun muses that something just isn't right. He'd finally managed to escape that whole world of martial arts just so he could focus on cooking. Wujun thinks that this is his big chance as he starts prepping another dish. The problem is, most people in this world can't stand his food. He's totally baffled, remembering how the elders back in his old life absolutely loved his cooking. One of them even passed out from sheer deliciousness. Right now, our hero is cooking up some sausages and veggies when his adoptive brother, Shanho, gets home. The first thing Shanho notices is a strange smell in the air. Then he spots Wujun blissfully enjoying the food he just cooked. Full of suspicion, he asks if Wujun was the one who made that. Wujun happily says he was and asks if Shanho wants to try some. Even though he's hesitant, Shanho decides to give it a shot, hoping maybe, just maybe, Wujun had gotten better. Besides, he was starving, so he figured even Wujun's cooking would probably taste okay. The second it touches his tongue, he spits it all out. He's pretty sure that if he'd actually chewed it, he would have literally died. He makes a mad dash for the water faucet, convinced the food was made with rotten vegetables. Then, Shanho's eyes dart to the side, landing on a discarded package of cherries on the table. He turns to Wujun and asks if he actually put cherries in the dish. Wujun explains that he used them instead of sugar because they give it a tangy, refreshing kick that sugar just can't match. Shanho just says he gets it and that he's going to go take a shower, telling Wujun he should probably finish the rest of the food himself. Wujun reflects that it's been nearly a year since he was reincarnated, and he spent every day trying to master cooking. Still, the people in this new world just don't appreciate his culinary genius. He starts brainstorming how he can tweak his cooking to get them to like it, but when he tries another bite of his own meal, he honestly thinks it's incredible. While in the shower, Shanho is fuming about Wujun using cherries in that dish, thinking his brother must have lost his mind. He can't figure out how it could taste so unbelievably bad and why Wujun is so obsessed with cooking this way. Then he gets to thinking and realizes that Wujun's real talent isn't in the kitchen at all. He flashes back to the night their parents were killed by a monster and how Wujun took it down without even breaking a sweat. He realizes Wujun must have awakened his powers that day too, but he was on a completely different level than him. Shanho comes to a stunning conclusion. Wujun has to be an S rank. He thinks that if Wujun became a hunter, he'd be a living legend, and they could hunt together and get revenge for their father. Just then, a mysterious girl appears out of nowhere. Commenting on Wujun's food, she declares that his dish is the second most delicious thing she has ever tasted. Wujun is a little surprised it's not number one. The girl keeps on describing it. It was a simple plate of meat and vegetables with some sort of sauce. She says the secret that elevates the dish to such a high level has to be hidden in that sauce. Wujun thinks to himself that this girl actually understands cooking, as she asks if she could know the name of the masterpiece. Wujun tells her the dish is called cherry soya, and the girl deduces that the defining flavor must come from either the cherry or the soy. While she's eating, Wujun finally asks who she is. The girl reveals that she is the secret spirit of the culinary arts, She explains that spirits form contracts with humans to boost their skills and that she comes from the Cooking Grim dungeon. She says she was brought into this world to make one thing clear. This world's food is terrible and everyone has an uneducated palate. She boasts about having countless recipes that don't even exist in this world, and that the protagonist could learn every single one of them to create the ultimate flavor that no one has ever discovered. The spirit says her entire existence is dedicated to achieving that one final, perfect flavor. She goes on, saying she's met tons of chefs, but none of them were good enough to form a contract with her. But, she adds, that was what she thought right up until this very moment. Still totally lost, the protagonist asks her what she's getting at. The spirit explains that after tasting his dish, she knew he was the one who could create the supreme dish. And with that, she asks Wujun if he will form a contract with her. But then it hits him. The spirit was probably tied to an item Shanho had found, which means she technically should belong to his brother. The spirit girl counters that she hasn't actually made a contract with anyone yet, so she's a free agent. Wujun says the offer sounds pretty good, but there's a condition. In that instant, a brilliant light shines down from the sky, and just like that, the contract is sealed. A holographic panel pops up in his vision, announcing that he has become the dungeon chef class. Our hero is completely bewildered by all this information being dumped on him at once. The spirit girl cheers that they finally have a contract and tells him he can just check the journal for all the details. Wujun stared at the screen in disbelief. Level 1. And my recipes are locked? He was fuming this, after he had mastered every martial art in the world. The little spirit girl immediately started to panic. Oh no, that's not your personal level. She rushed to explain, it doesn't mean you're a beginner or anything. She pointed out that the number actually represented the level and proficiency of his culinary grimoire. The spirit explained that to level up, he needed to complete missions and use recipes from the grimoire, but since he wasn't a hunter, he couldn't access any of it. She added that all the special ingredients were in dungeons, which were also off-limits to him. The gears started turning in Wujun's head. So, you're saying if I become a hunter, I get access to all the recipes? He asked. You got it. The spirit girl confirmed with a nod. As soon as you clear the tutorial tower and officially become a hunter, the grimoire's missions and recipes will be all yours. Wujun remembered his brother, Xianhou, mentioning that the tutorial tower only opened its doors every 3 months. He pulled out his smartphone, and a slight smile crept onto his face as an idea formed. Elsewhere, Wujun's boss was stewing over their argument. He felt a little guilty for being so harsh, but ultimately decided that what he said needed to be said. Thinking about Wujun, the boss had to admit the kid was a kitchen prodigy who could single-handedly do the work of 3 people. His only flaw was his bizarre choice of ingredients. His phone buzzed, showing a new message from Wujun. The boss sighed, assuming it was about their fight the day before, and prepared himself for more drama. But when he opened it, the message was straight to the point. Wujun was resigning from his position in the kitchen. After the gate incident, enigmatic towers had materialized across the planet. It was soon discovered that anyone who conquered a tower gained the ability to use mana. The interiors of these towers were constantly shifting, presenting new trials for every person who entered. The only way to unlock the power of mana was to battle through the hordes of monsters and navigate the deadly traps inside the towers. Despite the obvious dangers, the towers were a huge draw. An endless stream of challengers, blinded by the promise of wealth and fame, poured their fortunes into just trying to clear the tutorial level. The air at the tower's starting point was thick with hope and desperation. A hunter was caught by surprise when a green slime launched an attack. He deftly sidestepped the gooey assault before lunging forward to strike the creature's core. The slime exploded with a squelch. After all that effort, his only reward was some slime fluid and its core. The hunter kicked the ground in frustration. He had defeated 4 slimes and not a single one had dropped a decent weapon. All I ever get is this worthless slime fluid, he grumbled, collapsing onto the floor. I've already blown 20 million on this tutorial tower alone. He let out a deep sigh. I need about an hour to recover. Lying on the cold stone, he reconsidered. Actually, you know what? With how hard I've been working, I think I deserve a solid 2 hours. He was startled by the arrival of more people. What's with these rookies? He scoffed, sizing them up. They didn't even bother to wear leather armor. The newcomers he was mocking were, of course, Wujun and his culinary spirit. Wow, we were teleported in an instant, Wujun commented, looking around. This is way more convenient than the methods they used back in the Central Plains. Your outfit is definitely turning some heads, the spirit girl whispered. The comment caught Wujun off guard. It had been half a year since he got his memories back, and he thought he'd gotten pretty good at blending in. Wujun took a moment to curiously observe what the other, more seasoned hunters were wearing. Hey, new guy. Another hunter suddenly called out. There's a monster heading your way. You better tag it before someone else does. A slime bounced rapidly toward the protagonist, who seemed completely unbothered. even as the other hunter frantically yelled for him to be careful. He defeated the slime with a single, effortless strike. I probably should have brought some armor, he thought to himself, realizing he needed to be more prepared for the long road ahead. The Grimoire's interface popped up, displaying a message: "New ingredients are available. Would you like to register them?" Wujun was a bit puzzled by the prompt. He figured the ingredients it was referring to must be the remains of the slime he just dispatched. "Hey, you jerk," a trio of hunters shouted as they approached him. "Don't even think about looting that slime." But Wujun was so captivated by his new culinary system that he didn't hear a word they said. Two of the men stepped forward, trying to look tough. "Don't act all high and mighty," one of them said. "We've been through way tougher fights than this." "Wujun, we're drawing a lot of attention," the spirit girl whispered nervously. "Just drop the items from the slime so we can leave." Wujun finally noticed how awkward the situation had become. He spotted a sword on the ground and casually picked it up, settling into his stance. He couldn't help but reflect that the central plains were just as messy before he showed up. Now in a fighting pose, he figured this would be a good way to kick off his tower climb. The three hunters saw this and immediately prepared for a fight, staying on high alert. "So, it looks like he wants to go," one of them said. "Just remember, if we get hurt, we can get healed outside, but it'll ruin our chances of climbing higher today." One of the hunters suggested they back off since they didn't have weapons, but their leader ignored him and charged headfirst at Wujun. "Having a sword doesn't make you special," they yelled. "You're still surrounded by the three of us." The protagonists remained totally unfazed by their threats. At the very least, Wujun thought, these guys seem to have a basic grasp of combat strategy. Suddenly, a hunter tried to attack Wujun from behind with a wooden club, but Wujun simply knocked him down and disarmed him with a single tap from his sword's hilt. Annoyed, another hunter lunged at Wujun, who dodged the attack without breaking a sweat. The protagonist then used the hunter's own momentum against him, sending the guy flying. The last hunter was completely terrified and just stood there, frozen, as Wujun approached. Wujun casually tossed a wooden club at him, ending the confrontation with one final blow. The spirit girl was absolutely stunned by his fluid movements. "If we were in the Central Plains," Wujun remarked casually, "I would have just broken their necks right away." With that, he moved on, reminding himself that he had to abide by the laws of this new world. As they walked, Wujun asked the girl, "So, am I the only one who can see this grimoire screen?" "Not at all," the girl replied. "Every contractor can see each other's grimoires." "So, can I register ingredients in the grimoire now?" Wujun asked. The girl confirmed that he could, even though he wasn't an official hunter yet. Without a moment's hesitation, Wujun tapped yes on the pop-up window. Whoa, a screen just popped up saying slime fluid has been registered as an ingredient. He figured all the other loot he grabbed must be logged in here too, so he started scrolling. He spotted a recipe for slime pudding, but when he tapped on it, a permission-denied message popped up. The little spirit chimed in again, reminding him, "You can't view that recipe yet." She started waving her hands frantically, insisting, "It's not the grimoire's fault, I swear. It's because you're not a real hunter yet." She sighed, thinking about all the clueless owners who never figured out the book's real potential. "In thousands of years, nobody's been as ready for this grimoire as you, Win," she declared. "I absolutely can't let you get away." Before he could even finish his thought, she shrieked right in his ear. "I'll agree to anything, just don't cancel the contract." Wujun was completely baffled as the spirit started crying, pleading with him not to break their deal. "Whoa, hang on," he explained. "I was just going to ask if I could cook something that isn't in the recipe book. I'm going to make something new. Blindly following someone else's instructions is pointless." Still, looking terrified, she whispered, "Is that really all you meant? You weren't going to cancel?" Wujun just shook his head. "The thought never even crossed my mind." The spirit figured Wujun was just ticked off about the locked recipe, but he clarified, "Nah, I'm just not used to this whole system. I don't have any complaints. I've met a lot of people over the years," she said, looking amazed, "but you're the very first one to ever say he'd cook without a recipe." "Well, there's only one way to find out," the protagonist said, starting to move again. Wujun suddenly glanced back, feeling eyes on them. He confirmed someone was tailing them and just kept walking. Lurking in the shadows, the man following them noticed something that made him pause. He was stunned to see a grimoire spirit, wondering what on earth a contractor was doing in the tutorial tower. The protagonist casually opened a jar of slime fluid and dipped a finger inside. Then, he immediately stuck his finger in his mouth to taste it, as the spirit yelled, "Don't eat that. They're poisonous." She shrieked in a panic. "It's not deadly, but you're about to get a terrible stomachache." Wujun paid her no mind and continued to savor the taste. "Huh," he remarked. "I thought it'd be sickeningly sweet, but it's actually bitter with a nice, spicy kick." The spirit just stared, wondering how he wasn't doubled over in agony. Meanwhile, Wujun was already planning, This would be perfect for desserts or maybe to season some meat. Still in shock, she stammered. Well, as long as you're not in pain, I guess it's fine. She then asked, so, what are you planning to make? Wujun considered that the slime fluid's poison worked quickly. With that in mind, he decided to channel yang energy into his hands to purify the ingredient. He then switched to yin energy, pulling the heat from the fluid and causing it to solidify. The protagonist broke off a small piece to try his creation. A grin spread across his face. Okay, I know what to make, Wujun declared. A yang gang. Just then, several more slimes squelched towards them, and Wujun added, looks like I'll need plenty of ingredients. A short time later, the man who was pursuing them came down the same corridor. Something's off, he muttered, seeing the huge number of weapons left on the ground. He picked up a spear, noting, it's in rough shape, but it's still a pretty good weapon. The man thought it over. They had ditched all this gear and only took the slime drops. Judging by the sheer volume of discarded weapons, their only goal must have been farming slimes. Still, he just couldn't figure out why. He kept mulling it over. Slime drops are toxic, so there could be only one reason to gather them inside the tutorial tower. He concluded that the tower must be hiding some secret he didn't know about. A sudden panic seized him. The future has already been altered. He immediately broke into a sprint, trying to find Wujun. He cursed himself for not acting sooner, thinking that this Grimoire contractor was a complete wild card. After a long run, he burst into a chamber, panting heavily. There, he saw Wujun and his Grimoire spirit. Wujun noticed the man entering and figured he was the one who had been following him. As their eyes met, Wujun seemed to grasp the situation instantly. Wujun guessed the man was there for his Grimoire spirit. The protagonist was also a bit puzzled, wondering how the man was able to see the spirit in the first place. The mysterious man just kept sizing Wujun up with a suspicious glare. He figured Wujun must have wiped out every slime in the area, given the loot scattered everywhere. I don't know what kind of Grimoire spirit he has, the man thought, but it explains why he's so calm. He couldn't make sense of a low-level hunter possessing a legendary Grimoire spirit. There was only a certain group of people who would ever give a Grimoire to a complete beginner. The man became convinced that Wujun was working with that group, feeling the pressure of his aura from across the room. Deciding to play it cool, the man surrendered slightly. Hey, just being cautious here, he said. You kind of came out of nowhere. He continued, I don't want any trouble, while thinking to himself, I don't recognize this guy at all, but he's got something special. He could derail my entire plan. The man's new objective was to find out why the protagonist was harvesting slime items. Wujun relaxed his stance, saying, you know, fighting is forbidden among people in the tower, but that was a pretty flimsy rule. All of a sudden, the protagonist started walking directly at the mysterious man, who immediately went on high alert, unsure of Wujun's intentions. He braced for a fight, thinking, I knew it. He's definitely with that group. But as Wujun closed the distance, he just offered a friendly smile and said, Hey there, I'm Wujun. The mysterious man was completely caught off guard by his cheerful attitude. The two of them exchanged nods, and the man introduced himself as Jo Song-jun. Playing dumb, he then asked, Hey, did you see what happened here a little while ago? The man went on, I just thought it was really strange to see all this slime equipment scattered through the dungeon. I mean, people usually hunt slimes in the tutorial specifically for their gear, he added. So I found it pretty weird that someone would kill them all and not even bother to pick up the items. Oh, that was me, Wujun admitted easily. The man was shocked that he confessed so casually and started to second-guess his theory about him being part of that group. He reasoned that the group he was thinking of is obsessively secretive about who they are and would never act this openly. Okay, so this guy isn't with them, the man figured. But what in the world is his endgame? Still, playing it cool, he told Wujun. That was some seriously impressive haggling, by the way. Well, he continued, we both got things to do, so I'll let you get back to it. He couldn't shake the feeling that while Wujun definitely wasn't part of the expected crew, his obsession with slime drops was just plain weird. Song-jun's mind was racing. The hidden piece of this tower isn't supposed to be found for another 20 years. Is it possible he knows about that, too? An unbelievable suspicion started to form in his mind about Wujun's true identity. In his original timeline, 30 years from now, the entire world had been obliterated. It was only after that apocalypse that Song-jun experienced the miracle of regression, a power that flung him 30 years into the past to get a second chance. But in all his memories, there was no one named Wujun. Since he wasn't with the group he'd been watching, a new thought emerged. Could Wujun have also been sent back in time, just like him? Seong-jun immediately shut down the thought. No way. He muttered to himself, that's completely ridiculous. A total waste of brain power. His expression turned grim as he left. He had to focus on his own mission. Failing to secure the hidden piece would derail his entire plan for getting stronger. Wujun, still in the room, watched him go and thought, now that is one sly fox. He replayed their meeting in his head, how Seong-jun kept him at arm's length until the very end and didn't even flinch when he saw the Grimoire spirit. As Seong-jun's figure faded into the distance, Wujun mused that they might be more alike than he first thought. In the meantime, he'd certainly done a number on the tower's slime population. At long last, he had every ingredient needed for his creation. After one final sweep of the room, he declared, "All right, I'd say this place is officially spotless enough. Time to start cooking," he announced cheerfully to the spirit girl. She just stared back at him, utterly baffled by his last comment. Wujun tried again. "So, could I get a pot?" Her confused expression didn't change. "Come on, I can't exactly cook with my bare hands," he explained. "You're the spirit of a culinary grimoire. Isn't there a way to do some cooking in here?" Suddenly, the girl's eyes widened as if a light bulb had just switched on in her head, and she excitedly began to chant a spell. A cooking pot popped into existence out of thin air. "Voila," she declared proudly. "I can summon any cooking tool you could ever need, anytime." "Perfect," Wujun beamed. "I'll also need a spatula and a square mold, and it'd be amazing if the spatula was silicone." With all his equipment ready, the protagonist was set to begin his culinary adventure. He made a grand announcement. "Today, I will be crafting a delicacy known as yoken. It is the single best application for the slime items I've gathered." The slime core was glowing a bit too brightly for his main mixture, so Wujun came up with a different plan for it. He explained, "As long as this inner material doesn't dissolve into the fluid, I can use it to create some neat patterns." As he sliced into the core, he felt its unique, rubbery texture. He decided to dice it up into small cubes and use them kind of like tapioca pearls. His first step was to boil all the slime fluid to purify it of any toxins. Next, he carefully poured the purified liquid into the mold. As the edges began to set, he sprinkled in the diced pieces of the slime core. "See this melted part in the pot?" he pointed out. "That's the real key." He then noted, "Once the rest of the slime fluid cools down a bit, it'll make the perfect base broth." He then poured the liquid base over the ingredients already waiting in the mold. Picking up his new spatula, Wujun began to gently swirl the mixture, creating elegant patterns within the dish. "These designs will change up the texture and the flavor," he explained, "which keeps every bite interesting." To finish, he used a flash freezing technique to rapidly cool the dish. With a quick, practiced flip of the mold, the yokan slid out perfectly. And just like that, he had successfully created an entirely new dish, slime yokan. Both Wujun and the spirit girl gazed at the masterpiece with satisfaction. "Quick, cut a piece," the girl urged, bouncing with excitement. At that exact moment, a system message appeared. "New recipe has been added." They both blinked in surprise at the message, watching as the system began to process the data for the slime yokan that Wujun had just invented. The final result then flashed on screen, rank F. Wujun was floored. An F? But the girl quickly said, wait, look at the whole thing. It hasn't shown the quality yet. Is the quality rating more important than the rank? Wujun asked. Absolutely, she replied. Right on cue, another message popped up. You have leveled up. A flood of notification windows opened, but one immediately grabbed his full attention. It clearly stated his dish had achieved an A-level quality rating. Another notification appeared right after, announcing that a new recipe had been unlocked thanks to his recent achievements. An A-level quality. That's amazing, the girl cheered. Wujun, however, was still stuck on the first result. I don't get it. How can it be good if it's an F rank? You were just asking about quality versus rank, remember? The girl said. I can explain it all while we eat. Works for me, Wujun replied, cutting a slice of the yokan. The girl immediately zipped over and took a huge bite. Her eyes sparkled with delight. This is unbelievably good, she gushed. Making a contract with you was the best decision of my entire life. She then began to explain. So, the quality rating is all about how delicious something is. Getting an A rank, she continued, means you've made something truly gourmet level. The overall rank, though, just measures how difficult the recipe is. Since slime yokan has a pretty simple cooking process, it gets a lower rank. Simple as that, she added. The higher the quality and rank, the more points you'll get. You can also snag bonus points by clearing achievements. Wujun finally tasted his creation, carefully analyzing its flavor profile. It has a bitter and spicy note that just melts into the sweetness, he observed, and the texture is actually really pleasant. Oh, and your recipe book has been activated, the girl told him. Recipes are the absolute heart and soul of the dungeon culinary grimoire. You can use points to buy new recipes, she continued, and there are recipes for every kind of food you can imagine. As she spoke, Wujun looked over his status panel, seeing that new dish categories had been unlocked. The girl noticed his fairly calm reaction and figured, well, I guess he's not that shocked since he's the one who invented it from nothing. Wujun looked at the extensive list. Do I have enough points to just buy everything? He wondered aloud. The girl laughed. You earned a lot, but there's a small catch. Usually, she clarified, you have to complete missions to unlock recipes. You start with basic dishes and work your way up, improving your skills along the way. A light bulb went off for Wujun. So I basically just skipped the standard training path. Exactly, the girl confirmed. Missions unlock recipes, better dishes help you level up, and leveling up gives you access to even better recipes. She finished with a look of pure astonishment. In all my thousands of years, no one has ever just invented a high-level recipe from scratch and jumped straight to level 4 like this. So it dawns on Wujun that he can level up and rack up points just by cooking, no missions needed, and the spirit girl totally confirms it, telling him to keep on creating new recipes. Wujun remembers that the Grimoire only gives quests to actual hunters, so his first instinct is to just blast through the area and be done with the tower. But then, a thought stops him. He realizes this dungeon is probably a gold mine for rare ingredients, and it would be a total waste to just leave now. With that in mind, he decides he's going to make a few more dishes, figuring he has a good 2 weeks before the tower closes anyway. Wujun gets to the second floor and immediately walks into an arrow trap. It's not a major hassle, but he can tell right away that things have changed on this level. He notices the traps are way more clever and the slimes have picked up some unique abilities, making them a lot more annoying to fight. Anyone who was just coasting on the first floor would now have to seriously focus on just surviving. But for Wujun, this was hardly a challenge. After all, the guy marches to the beat of his own drum. Wujun had already cleared out the monsters and was in the middle of preparing another meal, a red slime jelly with a solid B-level quality score. As the spirit girl digs into the jelly, praising it as a stereotype-shattering, brilliant idea, Wujun just sighs and declares that he's failed again. The girl isn't having it, asking what in the world could be bad about this amazing dish, and reminds him that he's been churning out food for the last 10 days. She points out that the Grimoire has hit level 3 and he's gained another 15 points. But Wujun is still bummed out, insisting it's because he's just not skilled enough. On second thought, however, he concludes the real reason his ratings aren't climbing is the lack of ingredients, since he's been scraping by with what he can find across 2 floors for 10 days. Wujun recalls how the first floor had nothing but green slimes, and while the second had a variety of types, relying solely on slimes for ingredients is extremely limiting. He grumbles that if he only had a little bit of chocolate, his dish would have been absolutely perfect. The spirit girl, who's been listening to his complaints, looks a bit concerned and tells Wujun he has more talent than any chef she's ever seen, but he needs some basic knowledge to get truly good results. With that, she explains that while his passion for creating new dishes is a chef's greatest quality, he has the talent but lacks any real knowledge about the Grimoire itself. To wrap it up, she argues that it's much more important for him to build his foundation by making existing recipes instead of constantly trying to invent new ones from scratch. Wujun thinks about what she said, realizes she's absolutely right, and decides to go back to square one, asking her what they should try first. He finds a recipe called King Slime Ice Cream and is immediately taken aback by the name. Now super curious, he decides this is the dish he wants to tackle. Checking the ingredient list, he realizes he hasn't seen any monster that even resembles a king slime in the tower and starts to wonder if he needs to leave to find one. But before he can make a move, a notification pops up revealing that the king slime is on the 3rd floor of the tower. He's thrilled, realizing he's already found the entrance to the 3rd floor and that things are finally going his way. Wujun and the spirit girl then start making their way to the 3rd floor, their new target being the king slime. It's now been 10 days since Wujun entered the portal, and back in the city of Su, a crowd of reporters has completely surrounded the area. That was the day when everyone who had successfully cleared the 3rd floor was expected to emerge from the portal. 2 guys in the crowd are chatting, saying how everyone coming out today has already been snapped up by guilds and that they're just waiting for a deal to fall through. They wonder who will be the first one to step out, and right on cue, someone appears. The person emerging is Baka, the first daughter of the Chenik Guild's leader. The reporters go into a frenzy, rushing to interview the incredible rookie and asking if she plans to join her father's guild. She arrogantly tells them she's refusing any interview that wasn't scheduled in advance and demands they get out of her way. One of the onlookers mutters that it's totally unfair, and his friend asks him why. The first guy explains that it's unfair because she's beautiful, has rich relatives, and is incredibly talented, then tells his buddy to keep an eye out for someone they can actually recruit. One of them argues that no one who made it to the 3rd floor would ever join a small-time guild like theirs, but the other counters that there are always exceptions. The man with the glasses complains that they have to wait another 4 days, since the real top-tier talent exits on the 10th day, making the 13th their last real shot at finding someone good. He adds that the people who trickle out on the 14th day are just the quitters and washouts, so they just have to wait and see. Inside the tower, Wujun is still busy fighting slimes. He remarks that the layout of the third floor is completely different from the first and second. He notes that while the first and second floors were basically giant mazes, the third floor is broken up into a series of separate rooms. Suddenly, he spots a doorway that looks nothing like the others he's seen and figures it must be some kind of special room. Wujun heads over to the strange door, and as he steps through, he finds himself in a forest packed with trees and plants. He's totally shocked to see a forest inside the tower. The spirit girl wonders if they somehow left the tower and ended up outside, but she doesn't sound sure. Wujun says it's definitely not the outside world, pointing out the slimes up ahead. Venturing further in, he finds an altar dedicated to a slime. Right then, his culinary system beeps, announcing that a special ingredient has been detected and that it will cost 20 points to unlock the recipe. Now, Wujun is positive the king slime is here, and he accepts the mission. He thinks to himself that this system has even more convenient features than he first thought. Wujun senses a presence coming up behind him. He turns to see Seong-jun, who has just arrived. Seong-jun comments that it took him longer than he'd hoped to get here, all while giving Wujun a suspicious look, thinking he snuck off alone to find some hidden item. Wujun just gives him a big smile and says that it's great he made it to the third floor. Seong-jun says that you only get one chance to clear the tutorial tower, so he wanted to see it all the way to the end, adding that it's pretty impressive Wujun made it this far too. Wujun says that there's something in this room he needs to get, and at that moment, Seong-jun is absolutely certain he was right. He believes Wujun is also after the unknown hidden piece. He claims that he's wiped out from the journey and needs to rest for a bit, but his real plan is to watch Wujun to see what he's up to. The spirit girl piped up, asking Wujun if he was about to summon the Slime King, but he just shook his head, saying they were short on materials and needed to go squish a few more slimes. From his hiding spot, Seong-jun put 2 and 2 together, figuring out that Wujun was farming slimes to call out the big boss. A system window popped up in his vision, clarifying that it would take 200 slime fluids and 200 slime cores. With the tower set to close in only 4 days, Seong-jun figured he'd just watch Wujun do all the hard work and then swoop in to steal the boss kill when the time was right. By the 12th day in the portal, Wujun was an absolute slime-slaying machine. He breezed through them without breaking a sweat, raking in tons of loot, all while Seong-jun watched his every move from the shadows. Wujun kept on his merry way, turning every slime in the forest into a puddle of goo, blissfully unaware of his personal stalker. This cycle repeated itself through day 13. By the 14th day, Sang-jun was getting antsy, reminding himself that the tower was closing the next day. He knew this was his last shot at getting the unknown piece from the tutorial tower, and he definitely couldn't afford to wait another 3 months for the portal to open up again. Seong-jun watched as Wujun kept collecting slime parts, figuring he must already know what was needed to summon the king. He suspected Wujun was just stalling for some reason before calling out the boss. That's when he noticed something really weird. Wujun was casually munching on stuff that should have been highly toxic. He guessed the Grimoire must have some skill that makes monsters edible, thinking how incredibly handy that would be for dungeon survival. He quickly shelved the thought as a distraction and tried to scheme up a way to snag the boss without Wujun noticing. Seong-jun had picked up on a pattern over the last 4 days. Wujun would disappear from the area for anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours. He noted that there was no telling when Wujun would return, making it a huge gamble, but it was his only option. He wondered if he could possibly take down the boss and get the unknown piece in just 30 minutes. He knew that hesitating now would mean losing his chance, so he decided to summon the boss the very next time he got an opening, since he had all the materials ready. The moment Wujun wandered off, Seong-jun made his move, heading straight for the summoning altar. Standing before the altar, he carefully placed all the required slime goodies on top of it. Then, he waited, his heart pounding with nervous excitement. He was still on edge when a brilliant pillar of light shot down from the sky, lighting up the whole area. In a flash, the Slime King appeared a massive, black ooze wearing a little crown. Its first move was to slam itself into the ground, a shockwave that tore up the entire clearing. The dust cloud completely disoriented Jun. In that instant of confusion, the Slime King lunged, launching its first attack straight at him. Far away, Wujun stopped walking so abruptly that his spirit girl gave him a strange look. With a grim face, he said they had to get back to the altar immediately. The fight was already raging. The Slime King swung a massive tendril at Jun, but he dodged the attack with surprising ease. Seong-jun saw his opening and charged in, thrusting his spear deep into the giant, wobbly monster. His attack tore a hole right through the slime's midsection, and the creature actually seemed to flinch in pain. A confident smirk crossed Seong-jun's face. His attacks were working. He briefly thought about how it had been half a year since he'd returned from the future, confirming that just knowing what was coming wasn't nearly enough. His thoughts were cut short as the Slime King suddenly flew into a rage. Jin mused on how his meticulous planning had saved the world from total destruction, all while effortlessly dodging the slime's furious attacks. In one fluid motion, he leaped onto the slime's jiggly body, declaring that he wouldn't allow himself a single day of rest. An instant later, he was soaring high above it, ready to bring his mana-infused spear down hard. He enveloped his spear in a shimmering aura and plunged it downwards in a powerful strike, nailing the slime from above. After the hit landed, he again thought about how much damage his attacks were doing. Before the boss could even think about hitting back, he jumped away to create some distance. He reflected on how his fighting skills were light years ahead of where they were in his past life. As he continued to battle, Seong-jun thought that at this rate, he could definitely grab the unknown piece while evading the slime's attacks. Meanwhile, Wujun had already made it to the scene and was watching Seong-jun from a distance, remarking, "Hey, he's not too shabby." He could see that the kid wasn't trying to meet the Slime King's brute force head-on. Instead, he was letting its power flow past him while adding his own strength into the openings. Wujun noticed that the guy looked to be about his own age, but his skill level was way too high for his years. Wujun's eyes then locked onto a strange energy radiating from the tip of Seong-jun's spear. The energy was weak, but it definitely didn't seem to be coming from the weapon itself. Wujun realized Seong-jun's abilities were punching way above his internal energy level and thought that if he were his student, he could become so much stronger. The spirit girl then whispered that this was the perfect chance for them to steal the Slime King. But Wujun immediately shot her down, saying that just wouldn't be right. He remembered how his old friend Shanho used to get absolutely livid whenever someone stole his dungeon boss kill, and the people he'd met in the tower earlier were cut from the same cloth. Wujun declared that it was simply common courtesy not to interfere, while Seong-jun took care of the boss as the battle between Seong-jan and the Slime King grew even more intense. Seong-jun was starting to struggle, admitting to himself that even with all his desperate training, this was still a tough fight to handle alone. He could feel his mana was just about tapped out. As a giant glob of slime was about to crush him, he thought this might be his last shot. He dodged by sliding right underneath the attack, thinking that if he could just land a clean hit right now, he might be able to finish it. He was so close to finally getting his hands on the unknown piece he'd been chasing after, but as his attack landed, something just felt off. As the slime's body collapsed, he suddenly saw Wujun standing there again. He was in total disbelief, whispering that it was impossible. Seong-jun muttered that the pattern Wujun had stuck to for the past 4 days had inexplicably changed today of all days. The moment his focus slipped, the Slime King landed a devastating hit, sending Seong-jun flying into a tree trunk. Lying in a heap on the ground, Seong-jun groaned that he missed his shot because he got distracted by Wujun. He wheezed that the wound was too deep for him to even think about getting back on his feet. Overwhelmed with frustration, he admitted that despite everything, he was still just pathetic, a total failure. He let out a bitter laugh, thinking how moronic he'd been to believe he could actually change the future. Just because he'd come back to the past, he'd gotten arrogant. It was clear that Seong-jun had lost someone incredibly important to him in that dark future. But back in the present, Seong-jun wasn't finished yet. He grit his teeth and began to struggle to his feet. As he pushed himself up, he declared that it didn't matter if he was arrogant or a failure. If he stays stuck in this mindset, the future's never going to change. He couldn't count how many times he'd been on the verge of getting wiped out, and he regretted every single one. It's crystal clear to him now if only he'd pushed a little harder. Feeling a new surge of resolve, he swears he won't repeat the same stupid mistakes. Seong-jan's eyes snap open, a fire ignited within him, ready to burn his own life force to obliterate this monster. He's absolutely determined not to give up. As he pours energy into the tip of his spear, he thinks, if I lose to something like this, I'll never be able to change a thing. He was dead set on eliminating that Slime King. He then rockets forward to attack the slime. But just before his spear can land, an intense pain shoots through him. His attack sputters to a halt as he starts coughing up blood. Man, my body is in terrible shape, he groans. With the slime winding up for another attack, all he can think is, well, this is the end. But right before it was all over, he spots a flash of light slice right through the Slime King. He can't quite process what's happening, and then his world goes black. Wujun had swooped in and saved Seong-jun at the very last second. A notification window popped up in front of Wujun, announcing that the Slime King had been defeated. He snagged the Slime King core and some Slime King fluid. The spirit girl was amazed, exclaiming, "You took down the boss in a single hit. I mean, that's exactly what I'd expect from you." As Wujun looks down at Jan crumpled on the ground, he just calls him a total disgrace. Wujun noted that the moment Seong-jun spotted him, his concentration completely shattered, which led to him getting slammed with a heavy attack and then freaking out. Wujun muttered that it was unbelievably reckless to try and draw out more energy when his body was already a wreck, which is why he was in such a mess. But honestly, even in that state, he still had more than enough juice to just run away. Wujun then put it all together. Ah, so Song Jun was gunning for the Slime King's core. Knowing full well that Seong Jun could hear him, Wujun announced, "You know, if I hadn't stepped in, you would have died." Then Wujun declared, "So I'll be taking that core as payment for saving your neck." After defeating the Slime King, Wujun admitted that he was genuinely curious about how a Slime King might taste. The moment he took a bite of the slime, his eyes widened in shock from the flavor. He remarked that for something so intensely sour, it had this amazing sweet aftertaste and a silky smooth texture, making it downright delicious, kind of like durian, the king of fruits. After that first bite, he said, "Okay, it's a boss for a reason. I can't resist this. I have to cook something right now." He started sorting through his thoughts and figuring out his next move. Glancing at the recipe, he was expecting something a bit more special, since it used an ingredient from a Slime King, but the instructions seemed way too ordinary. He felt like something was missing. The spirit girl quickly jumped in, assuring him that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the recipe. After hearing that, Wujun shrugged and said, "All right, if you say so, I'll follow it exactly." First, he started by boiling the slime fluid to add a sweet flavor. Next, he froze the slime cubes so he could crush them into a powder later. He then used a technique called Black Abyss to completely envelop one of the slime cubes. As soon as it was surrounded by this dark aura, the cube was utterly annihilated inside it, grinding it down perfectly. Wujun mused that this martial art was originally meant for cooking, but back on the Central Plains, it had hurt a lot of people. After that, he added the freshly ground cubes back into the original fluid. Then he began mixing everything together with a spatula. He noticed that the thickness was impressively boosted when he added the ground fluid, making the whole thing pretty fascinating. He pointed out that, according to the recipe, this method applies to all slimes. He realized this wasn't how he'd melted the cubes before and thought about how the shelf life of ingredients can change drastically depending on the cooking method. He found the whole process pretty interesting as he finished up the dish. And with that, the Slime King ice cream was ready. His system identified it as an A+ ranked dish with A- level quality. Wujun's system also let him know he gained experience, unlocked a ton of achievements, and leveled up a whole bunch. After finishing the dish, he announced that it was complete and that they should give it a try. The spirit girl was all for it. Just as they were about to dig into the ice cream, they heard a groan. Seong Jun was waking up. The first thing he asked was, "How long was I out?" Seong Jan realized his mana hadn't recovered and he was up way earlier than he should have been. He thought to himself that his entire body felt like it was on fire. He could tell a few of his ribs were broken, but at least he could still move. He then spotted Wujun in front of him, doing something pretty odd. Seong Jan confirmed that he wasn't just imagining things. He remembered Wujun defeating the Slime King right before he passed out. Then he noticed what Wujun was holding. It was the unknown piece. Seong Jan admitted to himself that he'd been way too careless, and because of that, Wujun now had the unknown piece from the tutorial tower, the one that shows up only once and never will again. Seong Jan was bummed that all his plans had gone down the drain. He'd even thought about trying to hide the piece, or maybe ambushing Wujun while he was busy with the slime. He thought about all the chances he'd lost because of Wujun, but decided there was no use dwelling on it and calmed himself down, remembering that not all was lost. He figured Wujun wouldn't just hand over the unknown piece, so he'd have to take it by force. Right then, he gathered his strength and tried to get up to snatch the piece, but before he could make a move, Wujun offered him a taste of the ice cream. Seong Jan was completely bewildered and just stayed silent, totally confused by what was happening. Wujun told him he should have some too, since he must be wiped out. Seong Jun thanked him and wondered why on earth Wujun would be sharing with him. He figured this was a golden opportunity and decided he might as well take advantage of it. He had no clue why Wujun was giving this to him, but he guessed it was probably fine as long as they didn't end up killing each other in the tutorial tower. The second he took a bite of the ice cream, it felt like his mind exploded. He questioned if Wujun was really a culinary groom contractor and wondered what kind of unholy flavor this was. He asked himself if this was actually edible, if this could even be called food. He really didn't get it, saying that the Grimoire spirit isn't human, so that kind of made sense. But this guy is human. How is he able to eat this? Yet, he kept eating, deciding that since this was the unknown piece, he had to get it all down for the sake of his future plans. He took another spoonful of the ice cream, telling himself to just bear with it and push through. As soon as he swallowed it, a system window popped up in front of him. The system announced that by consuming the Slime King ice cream, he had been filled with the pure energy of the slime and that his abilities had all increased. Whoa, my mana just jumped by 5 points. He was floored. He'd never heard of some unknown item just handing out stat boosts. Then it hit him the Grimoire was leveling him up through his cooking. Wujun snapped Seong Jun out of his daze. Hey, so, was it any good? Seong Jun considered that the main ingredient was literally a monster, figuring Wujun must have given it his all. Actually, It was surprisingly delicious, he admitted. Wujun stared back. Are you being serious right now? Next, Song-jun thanked Wujun for saving his skin earlier. But as he looked at him, a weird feeling washed over him. Yep, he thought, I'm absolutely certain of it now. The realization struck him like a lightning bolt. He had to get out of there immediately. He knew with every fiber of his being that if he didn't run, Wujun was going to make him eat another one of his concoctions. Song-jun quickly stammered, thanks again for saving me and for the food. But before he could finish, Wujun beamed, great. I've got a bunch more dishes for you to try. Making a break for it, Seong-jun yelled over his shoulder, I couldn't possibly trouble my savior anymore. Thanks for everything. As he sprinted off, Wujun just watched him go, sighing, how shameful. Well, there goes the one person who actually appreciated your culinary genius, the spirit girl remarked. Guess that just leaves me. Maybe we'll run into him again, Wujun said. The spirit girl reminded him, tomorrow is our last day in the tower. We should probably stock up on more ingredients. Back in the city of Seoul, the clock was ticking. Only 2 hours remained before the tutorial portal closed for good. Just then, Wujun stepped through, the spirit girl floating right beside him. Ah, it feels amazing to breathe fresh air after so long, she chirped. Wujun nodded, all right, let's head back, and the girl happily agreed. A system message popped up for Wujun, congratulating him on completing the tutorial tower. It officially designated him a hunter and granted him full access to a status window and inventory. Wujun was still wrapping his head around the status and inventory thing when he sensed a presence right behind him. Acting on pure instinct, he spun around and snatched what felt like a spirit right out of the air. He unleashed his full aura, pinning the hovering spirit in place with pure intimidation. With a deadly serious glare, he demanded, what are you? Easy there, chef. Calm down, the terrified little spirit squeaked. At that moment, another system window popped up, asking Wujun if he wanted to view the instructions for the inventory and status window. He paused, wondering what would happen if he just declined. After a moment's thought, he shrugged and decided to accept. Without warning, the spirit began to phase right into his body. Instead of freaking out, Wujun just watched, totally fascinated. Then it clicked, he could open the status and inventory windows just by thinking about them. He could freely check his stats or pull items in and out anytime he wanted. The system displayed his daily quests. Cook a meal inside a dungeon and serve it to another person. Huh, this is a lot simpler than I expected, Wujun noted. The spirit girl confirmed. Yep, those are your dailies. Wujun thought it over. Cooking wasn't an issue since he did it constantly anyway. The real problem was finding someone willing to be his guinea pig. If things get really desperate, I'll just have to force Shanho to eat it, he muttered. Suddenly, a voice bellowed, you brat. You dared to go into the portal without telling me. It was Shanho, and he looked furious. I've been waiting here all day for you, he yelled. Wujun was completely surprised. Why are you even here? Shanho huffed, I'm here to drag you back, of course. And hey, congratulations on clearing the 3rd floor. But Shanho cut right to the chase, join my guild. The scene shifts to later, with Wujun and the spirit girl walking. Looks like we're here, she remarked. Her eyes went wide at the massive structure of the Hunter Academy. Wujun, equally impressed, nodded. Yeah, this is the academy. On the walk home, Wujun and Shanho had been arguing about the guild offer. I just don't have the skills for it, Wujun claimed, but Shanho scoffed. Yeah, right. I seriously doubt you only cleared the 1st floor. Look, I'll recommend you, Shanho pressed. Just pass the practical test and you can join my guild. This is a golden opportunity. Still, Wujun refused, and Shanho's frustration was becoming more and more obvious. Shanho started listing the benefits, amazing perks, top-of-the-line equipment, a personalized schedule, and asked why on earth he was rejecting it all. That's exactly why I'm turning it down, Wujun replied, leaving Shanho utterly confused. Then Wujun dropped the bombshell. I became a hunter so I could become a better cook. The revelation left Shanho speechless. Are you telling me you gave up your dream of being a chef when you entered the tower? Shanho asked, bewildered. Never, Wujun said firmly. Shanho threw his hands up. You're going to regret this so much if you keep this up. They both stopped walking. Why's that? Wujun asked. Shanho revealed the catch. Because if you don't join a guild within a week, the government automatically enrolls you in the Hunter Academy. Wujun looked confused by the name. The Hunter Academy? You heard me correctly, Shanho said. Shanho started explaining that it was a state-run institution for hunters. The treatment there is horrible, he warned, and it makes it nearly impossible to transfer to a private guild later on. Not to mention, Shanho added, the whole place is rife with discrimination, and their education system is totally outdated. Shanho explained that the Hunter Academy allows access to any dungeon in the country as long as you have an observer, but he warned that things are far more dangerous than they sound. Wujun's ears perked up at the any dungeon part. I'll think about it, he said, but I'm pretty wiped out right now. Seeing how exhausted Wujun was, Shanho finally decided to ease up. Fine, Shanho said. Just make up your mind before you get dragged into that academy against your will. Wujun nodded. I'll let you know as soon as I can. Wujun checked a new message on his phone, thinking about how he only had until next week to decide. It was from the Hunter Academy itself, a stark reminder that he needed to choose very carefully. While preparing another meal, Wujun reflected that unlike the tower, where ingredients were basically just slimes, the outside world offered a whole universe of culinary options. Thanks to this, Wujun thought, I can invent new recipes and probably gain another 2 levels this week. Unfortunately, he had completely failed the mission to serve food to another person. He had offered some to Shanho, but Shanho refused, saying he'd only eat it if Wujun joined his guild. What an ungrateful brat, Wujun grumbled. That's a real shame, the spirit girl commented. So, if you go to the Hunter Academy, are you still going to be a chef? Absolutely, Wujun stated firmly. That's the entire reason I became a hunter. Even if I join the academy, I'm going to keep cooking. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was Shanho. Wujun figured he must have already found out he was planning to join the academy. He immediately rejected the call, muttering, ungrateful little punk. So, Wujun shows up at the Hunter Academy, and let me tell you, the place has a vibe. Even the spirit girl pipes up, saying the atmosphere feels pretty one of a kind. They spot this one kid who's totally buzzing with excitement about becoming a hunter, but you can also see he's stressing big time about what's next. The spirit girl looks around at the crowd and mentions how it takes all sorts to make a world. Meanwhile, Wujun's just thinking, hey, for an old abandoned high school, they fixed up. These hallways and the gym are sparkling clean. Wujun overhears some students gossiping about a guy named Jay. Apparently, some article praised him for clearing the 3rd floor, and they're all saying he looks just like his picture. Then they see Baek, Seol Ha, and someone immediately asks her what she's doing there, since she supposedly already signed with the Chanik Guild. Wujun can't help but wonder what her deal is. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spots Si Hongjun and thinks, well, I definitely didn't expect to run into him here. The spirit girl points to someone on the stage and tells Wujun to get a load of him, joking that the guy's head is as smooth as a griffin's egg. Right on cue, the entrance ceremony kicks off, and it's time to hear from the academy director. The director walks up to the microphone and gets ready to speak. He introduces himself as Lee Chan-jae, the head honcho of the Hunter Academy. The students are a little taken aback by how intense his voice is, as he goes on about how he's seriously bummed out by the Hunter Academy's declining reputation. Wujun feels a sense of déjà vu from all this passionate energy. It reminds him of his most devoted subordinate, the leader of the 3 demons from the celestial demonic sect. The director continues his rant, saying that while there are a lot of issues, the real problem is the lousy attitude and dishonesty of the students walking through their doors. Wujun then sees something that makes him mutter, you've got to be kidding me. He's here, too. The blood demon, Guaiji. And there he was, the leader of the 3 demons of the celestial demonic sect, blood demon Guagi. Wujun is floored to see Elder Guak in this world, just as the director starts talking about the chaos from the gate incident 30 years ago. He remembers Elder Guak as his most loyal soldier, a total powerhouse. He even recalls Qianma mentioning that Gu Zhang Myong, the head of the Juolgak family, had a similar vibe. Zhang got strong through pure training, never leaning on items. Now, the director is demanding to know what happened to the hunters of today. He challenges them, asking who would dare enter the tutorial tower without some kind of protection. Meanwhile, Wujun sees that the old man has found some happiness in this new life and decides he's going to help him out. Si-Joan is watching all this unfold with great interest, staring at the director and admitting to himself that for the life of him, he can't place the guy. He recalls that this man single-handedly took down B-rank monsters and that Lee Chan-jae was definitely present during the gate incident. He mentions that after doing some digging on HunterNet, he found out that everything Lee Chan-jae said was the real deal. Si-Joon thinks to himself, with that kind of power, why would he settle for being a simple academy director? He realizes that before his regression, the director wasn't Lee Chan-jae, and that's not a detail he would just forget. Si-Joon figures he needs to track down all the other ways his regression has changed things, and that's the real reason he came to the academy. With a dead serious look, he tells himself this is only the beginning and that he has to figure out all the ripple effects from his do-over. Suddenly, a teacher is showing students the ropes on punching, telling them to hit the mannequin with everything they've got. After the hit, their score would pop up right in front of them. He wraps it up by saying this is just a quick test to see where everyone stands and that he'll go over the academy rules once they're all done. The teacher adds that anyone who prefers weapons can grab one from the practice rack on the left, then asks if there are any questions. A girl shoots her hand up, asking why they have to do it 5 times when one shot seems like it would be enough. The teacher clarifies that it's to see how long they can keep up their peak power. Then another student chimes in, asking what the vice director's personal best score was. The teacher just says he's a B-rank hunter and that it would be easier for them to just use that as a frame of reference. He then says if that's all, it's time to get started and tells them to line up. The first girl up to bat lands her first hit, scoring 302 points. Another guy throws his first punch, netting a score of 272 points. A different young man takes a swing at the mannequin and racks up 403 points. Wujun, watching from the sidelines, comments that he's already figured out the scoring system. He notes that while there are some new techniques, the overall skill level is pretty disappointing. The spirit girl spots a familiar face, and up next is none other than Sion. Wujun figures he's back and was probably holding back his real power earlier because he was worried about him. Wujun wonders what Sion is planning. He thinks that, based on the martial arts he saw before, Sion should be able to hit a score of around 19,000 points. Then Sion unleashes on the mannequin and gets a grand total of 3,097 points. Wujun instantly knows he's hiding his true strength, especially since he saw him pour energy into his spear back in the tower. Wujun notes that the score was still really good, blowing all the previous ones out of the water, but Sion must have a good reason for sandbagging. Other students start murmuring that it's finally her turn, and the next contestant was Baek Seol-ha, who was already making her way to the mannequin. The crowd was buzzing, wondering what kind of score Baek Seol-ha would pull. She takes a long, deep breath to get ready, as a blue aura of pure focus starts to glow around her. In less than a blink, she's a blur of motion, rocketing toward the mannequin and landing a devastating hit. Every single student is absolutely stunned by the insane speed she just showed off. Then, the scoring machine starts to tally up her points, and with that incredible strike, she hit 10,793 points, a perfect score, which she made look completely effortless. Everyone is just shocked and a little terrified after seeing her nail a perfect score. A few guys wonder if she used some kind of artifact, but they know deep down that was all her. Then it's Wujun's turn. He walks up, gives the mannequin a tap, and scores 222 points. He decides it's probably for the best if he just stays out of this little contest. Sion and Baek Seol-ha's ridiculously high scores were the talk of the school, which led Wujun to officially enroll after Min-soo gave him the rundown on the academy's rules. A little while later, we see the Hunter Academy dorms. Wujun, already in the middle of cooking something, says that the dorms aren't so bad. He notes that there's a different kind of freedom here that he didn't have back home. While whipping something up, he had a genius realization. Salad tastes absolutely amazing with a blue slime base. Wujun's brother had warned him that the academy was a place where he'd get taken advantage of, which made him question why anyone would join a guild there. Then again, he figured, at the academy, he could cook whenever he wanted and share his food with people. Wujun also thought the classes were surprisingly fun, and he knew he needed to get a solid handle on the basic theory behind all the common dungeon monsters. Wujun noted how his classmates would grumble about being able to just look things up online, completely underestimating how valuable it is to learn from an actual person. All of a sudden, it clicked for Wujun that there was something he was supposed to do today, and he realized he'd better get going before it got too late. Over at the Hunter Academy gym, the instructor greeted the students, and you could tell from the energy in the room that a new activity was about to kick off. The instructor got things started, announcing that, as they discussed, today marked their very first mission, and he was about to give out the team assignments for the dungeon exploration. The instructor explained that he would be calling up the students along with the hunters who had observation skills, and together, they would lead the exploration of a low-level dungeon as a team. With that, the instructor began to read the names from his list. Wujun thought to himself that a real dungeon exploration mission sounded incredibly exciting. The instructor then started calling out the students one by one. He then announced that the next team would consist of Yu Seon, Ark Ilho, and their observer hunter, Yu Woo-jung Kim. Kim Jang and Lee Ji-yi were assigned to a different team, and their observer was slated to be Kim Jong-do. The instructor was now ready to announce the final team, Chien Woo-jin and Baek Seon. She was the one who scored 10,000 points. Wujun's ears perked up when he heard he'd be on the same team as Baek Seon. From the look on the girl's face, she was not exactly thrilled about being paired up with a hunter who seemed so weak. The instructor then revealed their observer, hunter, was Kim Chi-guk, which sent a ripple of shock through the students who knew him as the famous hunter from the powerful Ju family. The spirit girl chimed in that this guy must be a pretty big deal, and right after that, the announcements wrapped up. The instructor laid out the next steps. Once the observer hunters were introduced, the students needed to find their teams, clarifying that most were from the academy, but some were special guests. Just as the massive entrance doors creaked open, the instructor finished by saying their job was to clear the exploration dungeon with their observer's help. At that very moment, the hunters walked in, and the students began searching for their respective teams. Kim Chi-guk strode into the gym, immediately causing a commotion as students began whispering about how the academy could have possibly recruited someone of his caliber. Kim Chi-guk made a beeline for Wujun's team and, getting straight to the point, asked if it was alright for them to speak informally. The girl agreed it was fine, and Kim thought this was a golden opportunity to do her a favor that he could later cash in with Chienik. Kim explained to the girl that he had turned down an offer to be a lecturer but took this job because of his ties to Chienik and the Ju family, hinting that she should take advantage of learning from a B-rank hunter like himself. The girl gave Kim an icy stare and stated coldly that she was simply catted back Seong from the academy, not the daughter of Chienik from the Baekdu Guild. Kim was visibly taken aback by her response and stammered that he understood and would be more careful going forward. The spirit girl, who had been watching the whole exchange, commented on how annoying the guy was and how he seemed to be looking down on them. Wujun stayed quiet and just kept observing. Kim revealed that he had already scouted the list of available dungeons, which were all designed for training, and held out his phone for his two teammates to see. Bak was taken aback by their assigned destination and questioned if they were seriously heading there. Kim nodded with a solemn look, confirming their destination was the Killer Bee Dungeon. They soon found themselves at Nangaroo Station, the location of the Killer Bee Dungeon's entrance. Kim explained that while the place looked like a lovely park, hunters stayed away because of its F-rank classification. The main issue was the killer bees, which were exceptionally dangerous for F-rank monsters. Bak felt that this dungeon might be far too risky for Wujun. She recalled that Wujun's test scores were abysmally low and that he didn't seem particularly adept with a sword. She went over to Wujun, explaining that the killer bee dungeon was incredibly dangerous and suggested that maybe they ought to check with Hunter Kim first. Before she could finish, Kim interrupted, stating that with a B-rank hunter present, they wouldn't run into any trouble, and then he paused, trying to remember the other team member's name. Wujun introduced himself, and the two shared a quick greeting. Kim then added that it would be a mistake to underestimate Wujun, since he had cleared the tower, which meant he had to be capable of looking after himself. Wujun offered no reaction, simply taking in the conversation around him. Kim mentioned that other guilds were just flooding the low-level dungeons with their rookies, making them so crowded that it was impossible to get any decent training in. Wujun silently agreed. The other dungeons were so easy that the strongest members would handle everything, leaving him no room to showcase his own abilities. Kim then said that he wanted them to have a truly valuable training experience. He concluded by saying that as long as they didn't run into a boss or a monster that was C rank or higher, they wouldn't have a single problem. He then added that this particular dungeon was famous for not having a boss, so there was nothing to sweat about. He asked if they had any issues or if they were ready to go in. Bak remained silent, thinking that under these circumstances, it would probably be fine. The spirit girl, however, was clearly annoyed by Kim's cocky way of talking. Once they were inside the dungeon, Kim announced that before they got down to business, they needed to go over the basics of insect-type monsters, reminding them that their main threat is a common poison they should have learned about in class. Kim suddenly lunged, piercing a bee with his spear as he spoke about the swarm controller, explaining that if they could take that one out, the rest would be much simpler to deal with. Bak had already zeroed in on the bee leader in an instant and was immediately on the attack. Kim praised her skill, explaining that the leader bee's mana is distinct but hard to pick out without a lot of experience. While Kim and Bak were chatting, Wujun was already exploring the area on the lookout for ingredients. Wujun discovered a fenestra plant and was amazed by how many more ingredients were here compared to the tutorial tower. He decided to gather as much as he could, since they only grow inside dungeons. Meanwhile, Kim told Bak that if she put in a request with the Ju family, he could set up private lessons for her whenever he was free. Kim eventually took notice of Wujun's odd behavior and started to wonder just what he had been up to since they got there. "Hey, herb nerd," Kim called down to him. "Stop foraging for weeds and get over here." Bake just watched silently, thinking about how utterly useless academy students were. Meanwhile, Kim was lecturing like he was reading from a textbook. The absolute basic of dungeon exploration is to prioritize understanding the environment and its ecosystem. Kim's patience was finally snapping. "Hey, would you quit picking flowers and get back in formation? This dungeon has been explored already. What could you possibly be looking for?" "What an annoying idiot," the spirit girl grumbled, clearly irritated. How dare he interrupt the chief's sacred ingredient gathering ritual? Kim, completely fed up with yelling, just gestured to Sia. "Let's go. We're leaving him." Suddenly, a notification popped up for Wujun. He just learned the recipe for killer bee honey. A key ingredient, honeycomb jelly from an assassin bee. "We've been in here for 10 minutes, Wujun murmured to himself, "and I haven't seen a single speck of honeycomb jelly." He figured that even though assassin bees were massive, they couldn't behave that differently from regular bees. Up ahead, Kim and Bake were already fighting off a swarm, and Kim shouted, "Bake, don't overdo it. You can't afford to get injured." While searching for the jelly, Wujun decided, I need to check this area out myself. Sticking with the group is just slowing down my foraging. He started to drift away from the others, figuring, they're skilled enough. It's not like they're in any danger without me. They'd already taken out 15 of the bees, but the swarm just kept coming, never giving them a moment's rest. Even after we took down their leader, they're still moving like a single unit, Baek said. She had to admit, if it weren't for Kim, they'd be in some deep trouble. This dungeon was way more dangerous than she'd heard. If it's this rough for me, she thought, it must be even crazier for Wujun. But when she glanced over her shoulder, Wujun was just gone. She froze, completely confused by what was happening. In situations like this, you have to, Kim started to say. But Baek cut him off. He's gone. Kim blinked, not getting it. Who's gone? Baek clarified, Wujun. He vanished. Pure panic hit Kim. He started screaming Wujun's name at the top of his lungs, desperately hoping for an answer. Kim was completely losing it. That moron. I knew I never liked him, just picking grass while we do all the fighting. And then, a deafening, thunderous roar ripped through the air. The sound was so intense it made Kim's vision blur and his head rattle. Realizing this was way different from the bees buzzing, Baek also clutched her head as the sound hammered her eardrums. Suddenly, a bright red alert window popped up over their heads. The two of them stared in shock, having absolutely no clue what was going on. The alert read, enraged by the intrusion into her nest, the queen of the assassin bees has appeared. A swarm-wide coordinated attack will now commence. Elsewhere, Wujun casually sliced through another bee. Yeah, splitting off was definitely the right call, he said to himself. So many more ingredients to find on my own. That faint, sweet smell from before is getting stronger, he noted. There must be some really precious stuff up ahead. Following the scent, Wujun noticed a strange path. The spirit girl, who had been lagging behind, finally caught up. Hey, where are you going? We're supposed to stick together. They followed the path and found themselves at the entrance to a huge cave. Whoa, how did we not see this before? The spirit girl asked. It's tucked away pretty deep in the dungeon, Wujun explained. Wujun figured if he hadn't trained his sense of smell specifically for finding honey, he never would have found this spot. It was way too out of the way for anyone to stumble upon. As he stepped into the cave, he took a deep whiff. I think we just found the source of that sweet smell. The spirit girl gasped, looking at a massive, glittering beehive. It's a honey mine. Wujun was blown away by the size of the honey crystals. I have to know what these taste like. But the moment his fingers touched one of the crystals, a warning alert flashed right in front of them. Wujun spun around. The warning said the queen bee was furious about her nest being invaded. Right after the alert appeared, a massive roar echoed from far away. That must be coming from outside the cave, Wujun realized. Meanwhile, Chiguk and Baek were running for their lives. I really didn't expect things to get this bad, Chiguk yelled. He grumbled. If I knew this would happen, I would have brought a tracker from the academy. He was terrified that if he left the dungeon without one of the cadets, all his work to be recognized by the Jew family would go down the drain. In a desperate panic, Baek suggested, maybe we should split up to search for him. But the instructor immediately shot her down. That's pointless. While fending off a bee, the instructor added, if you disappeared too, we'd be in way more trouble. The instructor then gave Baek a stern look. You should know better than anyone that in a situation like this, splitting up is the most dangerous thing you can do. Baek nodded in agreement, but suddenly the instructor hissed, stop, hide. They heard a bizarre noise up ahead and ducked for cover just as the queen bee, a C-rank boss, revealed herself. The instructor's blood ran cold. That's a dungeon boss, no question. But why is there a boss in an F-rank dungeon? There shouldn't be one here, he added. Trying to beat a C-rank boss with cadets who just became hunters is impossible. You'd need at least 3 B-rank hunters for this. He started to freak out, remembering that 6 hours after a boss appears, the dungeon seals itself forever. That left them only 2 options, escape or die. The instructor took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He figured if he could solve this mess, Chiguk's family might reward him handsomely. They noted that the boss hadn't spotted them yet, so retreating was their best option. But just as they thought that, they realized the queen bee's massive eyes had already locked onto them. Before they could even think about reacting, the queen bee was already hovering right above them. And then, it started its devastating aerial assault. While Chiguk yelled for Baek to fall back, the instructor had an idea. Use the terrain to our advantage. Hide behind the big trees so we're harder to spot. As he dodged another attack, he yelled, I'll buy some time. Baek, get back and prepare yourself. Chiguk was stunned as the bee's attack sliced through the massive trees like they were nothing. She's way stronger than I thought, he grunted, realizing he had no other choice. I have to use my special technique, Spiral Spear, first form. With a powerful yell, he charged forward, unleashing a lightning-fast series of fierce spear attacks. After that whole barrage, The instructor realized his all-out assault only managed to put a tiny crack in the bee's shell, so he yelled for Baek to run. She was reluctant to just bail, but he insisted she get going while he tried to keep the giant bug occupied. But then, out of nowhere, Baek comes marching right back, declaring that her father taught her to never show an enemy her back. With that, she announced she was fighting too. The instructor completely lost his cool, shouting that she had no idea what was going on. He tried to warn her that this was a C-rank boss and that she needed to watch out. Just then, the beast shot forward in another ridiculously fast attack, which the instructor dodged by a hair's breadth. But the second he dodged, it hit him that Baek wouldn't be able to get out of the way. In a flash, Baek charged the bee herself, swinging her sword with all her might. After her attack landed, Baek figured she could at least defend herself for a bit, but then she realized her swing did absolutely nothing. It didn't even leave a scuff mark. The instructor decided they needed a new game plan, suggesting they split the duties. While Baek played distraction, he would land the finishing blow with his spiral spear. He knew they couldn't drag this fight out, so he decided to bet everything on one massive attack to shatter its tough exterior before his energy gave out. So, pouring all of their mana into the plan, they made their move, knowing this was their one and only shot. Baek sprinted forward, grabbing the bee's attention and ducking under its swing. The bee immediately started chasing after Baek, dead set on taking her down. But as she was dodging, she realized something felt different from how the fight started. The queen bee was summoning her minions. As Baek got swarmed by the smaller bees, she grit her teeth, knowing she just had to buy the instructor a little more time. For a second there, Baek thought it was all over. But suddenly, the instructor unleashed every last bit of his mana, executing his second form spiral spear technique that tore right through the queen bee and anything else in its way. The attack sent the giant bee flying. Baek, who had collapsed onto the ground, looked up and asked, Did we get it?" The instructor confidently stated that not even the toughest creature in the dungeon could take a direct hit from his full-power spiral spear and keep going. Just as Baek was sighing in relief and saying they should get back to finding Wujun, she was suddenly blindsided from behind by the queen bee, which was very much not defeated. The instructor, who was watching the whole thing, could only stare in shock. Before Baek could even react, she was hammered by the queen bee's enraged attack and sent tumbling through the air. She slammed hard into the trunk of a tree. Watching it all unfold, the instructor was overcome with dread at the sheer fury of the queen bee. It dawned on the instructor that he was completely out of options, and he fell into total despair. He started thinking about how he'd burned through all his power just to get a little recognition, only to die in a place like this. He came to the conclusion that this was all that scumbag Wujun's fault. He thought if it wasn't for Wujun, they could have just found a corner to hide in until the dungeon portal opened. For a fleeting moment, the instructor thought that if the bee was focused on him, maybe Baek could launch another attack. But then he saw that the queen bee wasn't even looking at him. It was looking past him. And there, strolling toward them like he was on a casual walk, was Wujun, coming to save the day. The instructor, absolutely furious, started screaming at Wujun, calling him an idiot and demanding to know where he'd been this whole time. He yelled about why he was only showing up now and told him to get away from the monster. As Wujun readied his weapon, the instructor just kept yelling for him to run, convinced he was about to be killed. The queen bee then charged at Wujun with everything it had. But before it could even get close, Wujun, with a single, casual swing of his sword, sliced the massive bee clean in half. The instructor's brain pretty much short-circuited at the sight. Wujun looked like he hadn't even broken a sweat. Still lying on the ground, the instructor just kept asking himself what in the world had just happened. He simply couldn't process what he was seeing. Wujun had cut the queen bee in two. This was the guy the instructor had written off as a complete nobody. He started to wonder if maybe he'd overreacted a tiny bit when he thought he was about to die. But after a moment's thought, he realized that, no, the queen bee was definitely strong enough to kill him. And Wujun had just casually obliterated it. He began to rethink every single interaction he'd ever had with Wujun. It was at this point the instructor realized he was in some very deep trouble. As he stumbled towards Wujun to talk to him, his fear took over and he just blurted out, "How? How did you do that?" But Wujun completely ignored him and just started to walk away. The instructor, feeling the cold shoulder, then remembered he should probably check on Baek, so he hurried over to her. He found that she was still unconscious, but she wasn't in any life-threatening danger, and her mana was circulating normally. That's when the instructor noticed that Wujun was carrying a beehive and wondered if that's what he had wandered off to find. He then realized Wujun also had an inventory pouch and questioned who could have possibly gotten it for him. He figured if someone close to Wujun gave it to him, he really needed to find out more about this kid. Then it clicked. Wujun must have cleared the third floor of the tutorial tower. That was literally the only explanation that made any of this make sense. The instructor kept mulling over why Wujun would join an academy instead of a big-name guild, asking himself who the heck this guy really was. But then a powerful, unpleasant smell snapped him out of his thoughts, and he wondered what on earth Wujun was up to now. The instructor walked up to Wujun, asking what he was doing. He noticed Wujun had apparently cooked something and questioned what exactly he was making. The instructor guessed that maybe Wujun had used alchemy to whip up whatever it was, and figured it might be some kind of item that repels monsters with its awful smell. He saw that Wujun had used the beehive in the dish, probably from the assassin bees, but he couldn't figure out why he'd added mushrooms that looked more like plain old weeds. He thought that maybe the dish Wujun made was intended to poison the queen bee, but since she was already in 2 pieces, there was really no point in him doing that. But then, Wujun suddenly offered a piece of his new creation to the instructor, leaving him totally stunned. He broke into a cold sweat as he realized Wujun wasn't making a potion. He was actually, literally cooking. The instructor immediately thought that Wujun was holding a grudge and was trying to get payback by making him eat this horrible concoction. The instructor glanced at the bee lying on the ground in 2 halves and decided it was probably better for his stomach to suffer a bit than for him to get cut in half. He steeled himself and took a bite. He kept telling himself that it wouldn't kill him. But the second the stuff hit his tongue, he felt a horrifying sensation as if his life was about to end. He described the food as absolutely terrible, with a shocking texture that felt like larvae crawling around in his mouth. The cooked honeycomb was way too soft, and the mushrooms were incredibly slippery. The instructor was confused by the dish's bitter taste, since it should have been sweet from the honeycomb, and he wondered what else Wujun had tossed into the recipe. Still suffering, the instructor was convinced Wujun had gotten his revenge. But before he could do anything, Wujun leaned in and asked him how the dish tasted. With tears streaming down his face, Chikuk manages to choke out that the food is incredible. Suddenly, a window materializes in front of him, announcing he's gained poison resistance and his body is now surging with energy. It clicks for Chuck that the dish boosted his poison resistance, and he figures it must be because it was cooked using monster parts. He gives Wujun a sideways glance, wondering who in the world this guy really is. Meanwhile, Wujun is busy checking the stats on his creation. He notes that Chegak actually recognizing the meal's true value is a pleasant surprise. He also admits the guy has a much better palate than he'd given him credit for. As a cascade of achievements unlocks in his system, Wujun confirms that adding the queen bee's gland was the right call. Its tangy kick perfectly balanced the jelly's sweetness, giving it a richer flavor. The spirit girl tries a bite and declares it the ultimate culinary experience, hitting all 5 of the basic human tastes. With his daily quests complete, Wujun figures it's a good time to go gather some more ingredients. But just then, Bake, who had been knocked out cold, starts to stir and sits up. She mumbles that the last thing she remembers is getting ambushed by the queen bee. Seeing the defeated queen bee, she immediately assumes Instructor Chuck was the one who took it down, making her even more impressed with him. Chuck, still fighting the urge to gag, notices Bake is awake. An idea pops into his head since the gross food gave him a poison resistance buff. Maybe it would help her too. He offers her a bowl, telling her to eat up to get her strength back, making sure to mention that Wujun was the one who cooked it. She thanks him for the food, and as she brings a spoonful to her lips, both Chiak and Wujun lean in, dying to see her reaction. After she takes a bite, Chak asks her how it tastes. Her eyes go wide after she swallows, and she exclaims that it's absolutely delicious, like nothing she's ever had before. Chag is completely baffled, asking her what she's talking about. You see, when Bake was a little girl, she had a terrible time actually tasting food. Her father, desperate to help, managed to get a rare item from a dungeon through a friend, which was supposed to completely restore her sense of taste. He was so hopeful it would finally work, but she still couldn't taste a single thing. Her father was crushed, and she felt awful, apologizing that she couldn't taste it despite everything he'd done. She tried to reassure him it was fine, saying that instead of tasting things, she could experience food in a way that was even better. But after tasting Wujun's cooking, Bake says it's the first time she's ever felt anything like this. She explains that in 20 years, nothing has ever worked, even with her dad spending a small fortune trying to find a cure. Chuck thinks Bake must be confused, probably assuming she lost her sense of taste from the shock of the attack. Bake just says her tongue feels tingly from the intense flavor. Meanwhile, Chuck is having a full-on mental breakdown trying to process what she's saying. Outside the dungeon, a whole crowd of reporters and academy staff has gathered. News reports are already flooding in about an unexpected boss appearing in the dungeon, a boss that had been dormant for 5 years and just decided to show up. A man strides purposefully toward the portal's entrance. It's Bak's father, the leader of the Qian Guild. He turns to his secretary and asks, "Is my daughter safe?" The secretary replies confidently, "She will be, sir. She's your daughter. I have no doubt she's fine." A reporter shoves a microphone in his face, asking how he feels knowing his daughter is stuck inside. The secretary instantly snaps at the reporter. "How dare you ask such a tactless question? Realizing he seriously misread the room, the reporter quickly shuts off his recorder. Beck's father was not happy with the reporter's stunt, calling him an insolent little fool. His secretary quickly told the guild leader to take it easy, reminding him that there were a lot of eyes on them and to think of the guild's image. Suddenly, the shimmering barrier over the portal flickered and died. The entry restriction was gone, and it looked like someone was about to come through. The secretary and the guild leader fixed their gaze on the portal. As the guild leader stepped closer, 5 figures emerged. Bak, Sayla, Kim, Chiak, and Wujun. All of them were perfectly safe. The guild leader rushed forward and wrapped his daughter in a hug, calling it a miracle. As the crowd murmured in astonishment that a C-rank boss had been taken out by a B-rank hunter and 2 students, people spotted the item in Chak's hand and recognized it as the trophy from a boss kill. Just so you know, weapons and artifacts fall into 5 categories: common, rare, unique, epic, and legendary. Chak thought to himself that you could count the number of people in Korea with legendary items on one hand. This thing was insanely valuable. The crowd's mood shifted from shock to excitement, and they mobbed Chek, firing off questions about how he beat a C-rank boss and what the assassin bee was like. They kept asking how he managed to keep the students safe, but he was completely lost as to why they were asking him all these questions. A guy recording the whole thing commented that it looked like Cheg single-handedly defeated the C-rank monster. Cheg, totally at a loss for words, just stayed quiet and shot a glance at Wujun. A man in charge at the academy had been seriously worried about keeping his job because of the school's poor performance lately. But after seeing the news that Cheguk had defeated a C-rank monster, he immediately assumed Chuck was the one responsible. That instructor was way more capable than he appeared. After the dungeon closed, reports flew around that multiple countries were now interested in the C-rank boss. Online comments piled up, praising Chuck and hyping up the prestige of the media company that broke the story. Chuck stated plainly that if it weren't for the students' help, he never would have survived. While some people online doubted his story, the academy director figured Chuck must have just gotten incredibly lucky to beat a C-rank boss at his level. Either way, he was just happy he hired the guy. Just then, he noticed his office door opening, revealing the 3 participants from the dungeon, the academy's newest heroes. The director warmly invited the trio to sit and chat, while Chuck looked completely embarrassed by all the praise. The director explained he called them in to make sure they got a bonus and to hear the first-hand account of what happened. Chiguk started off by repeating what was in his report, saying it would have been nearly impossible without Wujun and Bake's help. Chuck wanted to start the story calmly, explaining that at first, he thought it was just your typical run-of-the-mill dungeon. So, the guy starts giving a play-by-play of what happened in there, while Wujun looks completely bored out of his mind. Once the story was over, the director had to admit, the whole situation sounded pretty bizarre. Shigat went on, explaining that his job was basically to babysit them through the dungeon this time, but they really needed to brace themselves for more strange occurrences in the future. The director couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen that student, Wujun, somewhere before. He even mentioned that Wujun's whole vibe felt oddly familiar, and wasn't he the one always trying to get other students to eat weird food? Then it hit him like a ton of bricks. Wujun was the sect leader. The director's jaw dropped, and of course, someone immediately asked him what was going on. Chuck, completely lost, just asked if something was wrong. The director, trying to pull himself together, quickly said they'd talked enough for one day and that everyone should go get some rest. Deep down, though, he was still completely freaking out that the sect leader was standing right there. On their way out, Bake was giving props to the whole team for their hard work in the dungeon. Chiek chimed in, suggesting she get a quick checkup at a hospital just to be safe and to give them an update afterward. Cheg waved Wooin on, telling him to go ahead and that he'd catch up in a minute. But just as Chegak was about to take off, Wujun called out for him to hold on a second. Chup's heart nearly leaped out of his chest. He was terrified Wujun was finally going to spill the beans, especially after all those news reports. The thought of that happening honestly scared the heck out of him. Wujun hadn't said a peep to the reporters and clearly didn't give a damn about the boss loot, so Chuk was drawing a total blank on what he could possibly want to talk about. Turns out, all Wujun wanted was to swap phone numbers, which left Chikuk standing there, completely floored. Wujun just asked for his number, promising to bring him another crazy dish next time. Hearing that, Chek was so blindsided that he felt like he was going to collapse. He just turned and wandered off without saying a thing. Meanwhile, the spirit girl was absolutely livid, calling him a total idiot for being so reckless and basically letting someone else take all the credit for beating the dungeon boss. Wooin just figured that people always pay attention to the one who seems the most desperate for glory, and he'd much rather stay out of the spotlight. Anyway, after all that chaos, he'd managed to snag some new ingredients and recipes. Now, it was time to get back to the kitchen. Back in the classroom, Ween's classmates were all over him, asking if the news reports were legit. Apparently, Shock had told everyone he'd taken down a C-rank boss, and that the students' backup was a total game changer. His classmates wouldn't let up, asking stuff like, "What's it like seeing a C-rank monster up close? And what were the other guys on your team like?" Wujun mused that, thanks to Bacon Cheek, he'd actually managed to finish his daily quests for once. Now the only question was who he could get to try his latest creation. Just then, Professor Kim Jong-do strolled in, telling everyone it was time for class to start and to find their seats. The professor started off with a recap of their last lesson on labyrinth traps, but Wujun was still lost in thought, wondering who he was going to feed today. The professor announced they'd be reviewing the material as they watched the practical exercises on screen. First up to bat was Hansen. During his test, Hansen looked completely lost in a cloud of thick smoke. The professor dryly commented that if this was for real, he'd already be a goner, and that he needed to hold his breath and get his bearings. Gansung was clearly bummed out by his performance, but the professor told him not to worry, saying it was perfectly normal to feel frustrated. He reminded him, though, that in a real fight, you never know what's coming. This got the professor worried about how the students would fare in the big tournament just 2 months away. The Hunter Tournament is basically a big competition where everyone who's cleared the tutorial tower gets to show off their skills. A win at the tournament is a huge deal, it gets your name known and could even land you a spot in a major guild like Celestial Wings. Too bad the Academy hasn't had a single noteworthy student in the last 10 years. The professor wondered if there was still time to teach the class something new that might give them an edge in the tournament as he continued to watch the training exercises. He noticed Baek was doing exceptionally well, even commenting that she was good enough to be sent out on actual missions already. It was a little odd that she was even still at the Academy. Shanjin also had an amazing run, the professor even called it perfect. The professor noted that there were definitely a few promising students in this batch. Wujun was up next, and as his name was called, Songjin immediately paid close attention. He thought to himself that Wujun was a complete mystery. Nobody had a clue what his real abilities were, how strong he was, or why on earth he even enrolled here. Xianjun had been watching Wujun ever since he got to the academy, but all the guy ever seemed to do was mess around in the kitchen. He wasn't really expecting Wujun to reveal his true power, but he decided to keep a close watch, just in case. It looked like Wujun completely bombed his test, but it was all an act. He purposely pulled a lever to fake his own death. The result? He scored a whopping 0 points, which might have been the worst grade in the whole class. The professor was so annoyed by Wujun's performance that he was literally speechless. The spirit girl, on the other hand, was furious, yelling that the professor had no right to disrespect the chief and calling him an insolent fool. Sanjin realized Wujun was failing on purpose, but he just couldn't figure out why. Over in the academy cafeteria, a couple of students were complaining that if it wasn't for that jerk, they wouldn't even have to be there. They kept whining about how someone had messed everything up and stopped them from getting to the tower's 3rd floor, and that they only passed because one of their own guys bailed them out. One of the guys from the 3 Useless Brothers trio swore he was going to destroy that jerk next time he saw him, then went on a rant about how much he hated the professor's teaching style. He remembered the professor saying they were lucky to have even passed the tutorial tower with their skills and that everyone at the academy was starting on the same page. But as one of the brothers was walking through the cafeteria, he spotted a pretty bizarre-looking dish sitting on a table. They were wondering what kind of person would eat something that looked so disgusting when they realized it was Wujun, the very same guy they'd been trashing. Awkwardly, the 3 of them went and sat down right at Wujun's table. The guys were practically shaking, because they could tell from Wujun's face that he remembered them, and they knew one wrong move would mean they were in for a world of hurt. The spirit girl asked Wujun why he was eating so loudly and if he had any idea who those guys were. He just replied that they looked familiar, but he couldn't place them. Then, Wujun had a brilliant idea. He decided to offer them a taste of what he was eating, a blue slime salad he just whipped up. "You've got to be kidding me," one of the guys stammered. "Are we actually supposed to eat that?" "Not hungry?" Wujun asked, oblivious to the menacing aura that made it look like the Grim Reaper was standing right behind him. The young man glanced from the food to the terrifying aura and back, finally sighing. "Well, it's not like it's gonna kill me. Better than getting thrashed again, I guess." The moment he swallowed, his eyes shot open. "My stomach's on fire. It's like I either chugged a bottle of mouthwash or ate an entire mint bush." They desperately tried to find a single redeeming quality in the flavor, but ultimately surrendered, rushing off to throw up everything they'd just forced down. "Yep, that's about the reaction I was expecting," Wujun sighed. Another group of people who just can't appreciate fine cuisine. "So, enjoying the meal?" Wujun asked cheerfully. One of them was about to scream, "Are you insane? This is torture." But then he saw the terrifying glint in Wujun's eyes and quickly changed his tune. "Oh, yeah, it's, delicious." A new face stood at the front of the classroom. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Lee Jung-shik, and I'll be your guide to understanding dungeon typologies. Just a heads up," the professor announced. "If you miss more than 3 classes, you're automatically dropped." Also, the final exam is in 3 weeks, so you might want to actually pay attention. A wave of skepticism rippled through the students as the professor asked, "Any questions before we dive in?" First up is the Gauntlet Station, which some of you might know as the Honey Dungeon, the professor explained, but I'd advise any novice hunters to steer clear. It's incredibly dangerous. Wujun thought to himself, now this is my kind of class, mixing personal gain with the curriculum. The professor continued, "Now, let's talk about the Hangi Dungeons. The most notorious one is the Javali Westland, located just on the edge of Wangsmi. Ooh, that pig right there is supposed to be a real treat," the spirit girl chirped. Wujun squinted at the image. "That's not a pig, that's a wild boar." "Wild boar meat has a pretty gamey taste," Wujun mused, just as the professor added, "For E-rank hunters, this particular dungeon is basically a gold mine." However, the professor cautioned, there have been a number of disappearances in that dungeon. As long as the boars are in their active season, student entry is strictly forbidden. "But they look so yummy," the spirit girl whined. Wujun's mind started racing, wondering if there was some kind of loophole. Of course, the professor added, with a special authorization from the director, entry is possible. But frankly, I wouldn't recommend it until you've got a lot more experience under your belt. A light bulb went off in Wujun's head. He needed to find Guak Chaein. Meanwhile, the academy director was sitting in his office wondering why on earth that Wujun kid was standing in front of his desk. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, sir," Wujun said. The director waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Speak freely. What can I do for you?" The director's first thought was that this had something to do with the Assassin Bee dungeon, but he immediately ruled it out. Wujun was just a cadet who hadn't shown any particularly impressive skills during the placement test. Still, the longer he looked at the young man, the more he was reminded of the S.E. leader. Then, a faint pulse of energy emanated from Wujun, and the director froze. It was the exact same energy he felt from the S.E. leader himself. His professional demeanor shattered. "Where in the world did you learn that martial art?" he demanded, completely stunned. "Well, it's a funny story," Wujun began. "When I was a kid, my family took a trip to Mount Baekdu. I got into a little accident, got trapped, and stumbled into a cave. Inside, I found this old chest full of ancient-looking books, and, well, I got curious and started reading about martial arts." The director's mind reeled. So the sect leader must have left a book on Mount Baekdu, not Mount Tanhan. It all made sense. He remembered how the sect leader used to complain that his followers weren't getting the picture. The director had always assumed he was just upset they weren't grasping his teachings properly. But still, leaving a book on Mount Baekdu of all places. What was the reason for that? Looking at the energy signature coming off Wujun, he had to admit the story, as wild as it sounded, might actually be true. The director leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You seem awfully confident. How did you know I'd recognize your aura the second you let it flare?" Wujun smirked inwardly. The director was just as sharp as he remembered. "The book also mentions someone called the Blood Demon," he explained. "It went into incredible detail, so I just figured you must have learned your own martial arts from a similar source." The director's tone turned icy. "And you think someone could master these techniques just from reading a book?" Wujun shrugged. "It was a very well-written book. That settled it. The sect leader never did anything without a reason. If he wrote a book, it would have been painstakingly detailed." The director realized he absolutely had to hear more. "All right," the director said, "but surely you didn't come all this way just to tell me a story." Wujun didn't miss a beat. "I'd like your permission to enter the Javali Westland dungeon." The director considered it. "Normally, that's off-limits, but considering the martial art you've inherited, I'll make a one-time exception. I want to hear more about this book. It's fascinating," the director said, "but it's getting late. Come back tomorrow and tell me everything." "Understood, sir," Wujun replied. As he turned to leave, the director asked, "By the way, who are you planning on taking into the dungeon with you?" High on a skyscraper, Chiguk was giving his report. His clan leader, Ju Jiang, simply nodded. "I've heard your report. You may go now, Chiguk." As Chiguk was heading for the door, the leader added, "You did well." Chiguk froze for a second, then bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir," he managed before stepping out. The moment the door closed, he silently pumped his fist in the air. The family leader had actually acknowledged him. That man was famous for being stingy with his words and never gave out praise. With his duties done, Chiguk had the whole evening free and was about to head to his favorite bar when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Wujun. "Hey, wanna hit the boar dungeon in Westland?" Chiguk started chewing his nails. How was he supposed to get out of this one? Then he vaguely remembered reading something about that place in the Academy rules. He quickly pulled up the Academy's rulebook on his phone, and there it was. He remembered wanting to check that place out ages ago, but you couldn't get in without a special permission slip. Chiguk also recalled that all dungeon entries require a party of at least 3 members, and there was no way Shia's family would let her go anywhere while she was still recovering. A smug grin spread across his face. Too bad. He chuckled to himself. The rules are on my side this time. There's no way we can go. He quickly texted Wujun back, explaining they'd need official permission. Now, he thought, I can finally go grab that drink. Man, that Wujun guy is getting a little clingy. A moment later, his phone pinged with a reply from Wujun. Great. See you at 9 in the morning tomorrow, followed by a crystal-clear image of the director's signed permission form. The hunters who frequented that dungeon were usually low-rankers who washed out from the front lines. They were there to mine iron ore, a material prized for its high mana sensitivity and impressive durability. It's pretty standard for your average C rank, D rank, and even some B rank hunters to be swinging weapons forged from iron ore. That's why mining iron ore is such a good gig. The place is always swarming with hunters looking to cash in. Chuck couldn't wrap his head around it. Wujun was clearly a pro, so what was he doing in a mining dungeon? And ever since they got here, all the guy had done was wander around picking plants. Chuck finally called out, Hey, Wujun, if you're looking for the iron mine, I'm pretty sure it's a little further southeast from here. Wujun shot down that idea, saying he wasn't there for minerals at all, which just left Chuck even more baffled. Then Wujun dropped the real bombshell. He had no clue there was even a mine in this dungeon, leaving Chuck completely floored that he'd missed something so obvious. Chuck racked his brain, trying to figure it out. If he wasn't here for the iron, then what was the deal? Just as he was thinking, Wujun just vanished. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. Chuck bolted after him, but it was bizarre. Wujun looked like he was just casually strolling, yet he was leaving Chuck in the dust. Completely gassed after a full-on sprint, Chuck finally caught up, still wondering what in the world this guy was playing at. Wujun bent down, picked up a spiky cactus, and said, Hey, this looks like you could eat it. Chuck just stared, totally dumbfounded, as the guy beamed at the plant like it was a 5-star meal. Back to exploring, Wujun pulled up his cooking menu. His mind started clicking. The Slime King recipe used the unique properties of slime, so maybe this cactus had its own special culinary use. Chuck marched over to Wujun. Okay, seriously, why are you here? But Wujun just ignored the question and asked, Hey, where'd this cactus come from? Exasperated, Chuck shot back. It's from the iron mine I told you about. He was really losing it now. Like I've been saying this whole time, it's to the southeast. Chuck was just winding up to give him a piece of his mind when poof, Wujun was already a blur in the distance before he could even get a word out. Hunched over and gasping for air, Chuck realized Wujun had just covered a 40-minute trek in maybe 5 minutes, and the guy wasn't even breathing hard. When they finally reached the iron mine, Chuck couldn't help but wonder. A guy with Wujun's talent could get into any elite group, so why was he slumming it at the Hunter Academy? Just as they were about to head in, a miner stomped out, grumbling about some kid getting in the way. His eyes landed on Wujun, and he scoffed, This ain't a playground for morons. He grumbled that things were already chaotic enough with the rush of miners, and now he had to babysit a couple of rookies. His tone got even nastier as he snapped at Wujun. What are you gawking at? Scram. But then, the first miner's buddy did a double take, recognizing Chuck. He muttered, Wait, why is times here? He could buy out this entire mine if he wanted. Feeling the vibe shift awkwardly, Chuck leaned over to Wujun and whispered, What's going on? The second miner quickly stepped in, greeting Chuck warmly. Oh, don't mind him, he said with a friendly smile. He was just laying down the safety rules for your friend there. He explained that it's a dangerous place, and his partner was just being a little harsh because he'd hate to see your buddy get injured. Just looking out for our fellow man, you know? He added. Anyway, you two can go on in, just try to be quick about it. Chuck, ever the gentleman, thanked them for their concern. The moment they were gone, the miners started muttering. We've got too many people in there already, one complained. Another grumbled, Are we sure it's a good idea to let those two in? The guy in charge just snorted. Relax. They'll wander around for a bit and come back with nothing. They always do. Once inside, Wujun and Chuck came to a fork with 3 tunnels. They figured the deeper they ventured, the richer the ore would be, so they chose their path accordingly. Chuck chuckled to himself. It's funny. People are always quick to start trouble with you, but the second they see me, they change their tune real fast. The little spirit popped up, chirping. This has to be the spot the miners were talking about. The one with all the top-tier ore. Then it dawned on Chuck. Guys, he said. We forgot to bring any pickaxes. Wujun just shrugged and tapped his sword. I'll just use this. Chuck immediately protested. Whoa, hold on. You can't do that. You need actual, professional mining gear for this stuff. Chuck was still going on about how even the Academy issue equipment wouldn't be tough enough when, with a flick of his wrist, Wujun effortlessly carved a huge chunk of ore right out of the wall. Wujun picked up the slab and nodded. Yeah, this'll do. Chuck's jaw was on the floor, horrified as he watched this whole thing unfold. He was slicing through solid rock like it was butter. All right, we're all set here, Wujun announced cheerfully. All Chuck could manage to stammer out was, Are you even human? On their way out, the miners saw them and called out sarcastically. Giving up so soon? Chuck just calmly replied, Nope, we got what we came for. As soon as they passed, the whispering started. Figured they'd come back with nothing. One snickered. What do you expect from a B-rank pretty boy? Back outside, Chuck was completely baffled to find Wujun had already started a fire and was cooking. While prepping the cactus, Wujun muttered to himself, The juice is okay, but it's way too bland. Definitely needs something more. Then, inspiration struck, a slime sauce. He heated up the goopy sauce, then started dicing peppers and onions, tossing them into the pan with a flourish. It was just what it needed. That kick of spice transformed the whole dish, making it absolutely delicious. A system notification popped up announcing he'd gained experience and created a dish of extreme quality that was imbued with dungeon energy. That last part, dungeon energy, made Wujun pause. The spirit girl materialized again, practically bouncing with excitement. You did it, Chief. You cooked something that's even better than A-grade. I knew you could. She went on to explain that any dish that breaks past the A-grade barrier gets infused with dungeon energy, giving special buffs to whoever eats it. Wujun checked his status, and sure enough, the spirit was right. He'd gotten a strength buff that lasted for 24 hours. With a grin, he decided he knew exactly who to share this cactus creation with, the instructor. The instructor eyed Wujun's creation with deep suspicion, as if questioning whether it was actual food. Still, he had to admit, after the last culinary nightmare Wujun served him, this dish at least looked somewhat normal. He still wasn't sold, though. Can you even grill a cactus and eat it? He thought to himself, poking it cautiously. Well, Wujun already ate some, so it can't be poison, he reasoned. The second a piece touched his tongue, his stomach lurched. He fought the overwhelming urge to gag, thinking, what in the world is this taste? As he struggled with the disgusting flavor, he remembered reading somewhere that cactus was supposed to be refreshing and a little spicy. The texture was kind of like an avocado, though. He forced himself to keep chewing, but it was a battle. It feels like my entire mouth is being deep-fried with every bite, he internally screamed. Out of the blue, Jin handed Chigak a jar of sauce and told him to go wild with it on the food. Chigak was all in, totally convinced this sauce was the magic ingredient that would make everything taste incredible. The moment he took a bite, though, his mouth erupted in flames. After a brief but intense moment of agony, the instructor collapsed dramatically, gasping out that it was delicious. Wujun, for his part, was just beaming that his cooking was so appreciated. As Chigak lay there twitching, a notification popped up informing him that his strength had shot up by 3 points for a full 24 hours. He was completely floored when he realized his stats had boosted, just like the last time he'd eaten one of Jin's culinary experiments. But this time, the buff was going to last for 24 hours. It finally clicked for Chigak. Jin wasn't messing with him, and this dungeon food was way more than just a last-ditch meal. Suddenly, the ground started to tremble, and he thought it was an earthquake. A second later, the miners started screaming for everyone to run for their lives as a herd of wild boars came charging in. Chigak got ready for a fight, figuring that a few boars are no big deal to hunt. The tricky part is that they always rolled deep in a massive herd. As the boars got closer, Chigak thought that if he were by himself, he'd have just gotten out of their way. But with Wujun here, he felt a little bolder. So, he charged right at them, spear leading the way. He sliced through the boars pretty easily, but he noticed he was barely making a dent in their numbers. Things would be a lot simpler, he thought, if Wujun would just round them all up for him. But right when Chigak was about to yell at Jin to get in the fight, he looked around and couldn't find him anywhere. Chigak figured Wujun must have been swept away in the stampede, but then a voice whispered right in his ear, critiquing the over-the-top flair in his spear technique. Searching for where the voice came from, Chigak spotted Wujun standing on top of a mountain. He had absolutely no clue how Wujun managed to get up there so fast. Wujun called down that they were just beasts and that swinging his spear like he was fighting people was a waste of time. Chigak was mostly confused about how he was hearing him so clearly from that far away. While Wujun was telling him to pay attention, a boar snuck up right behind him, ready to attack, but Chigak dispatched it without any trouble. As Wujun kept watching, he thought to himself that Chigak was the only person in the entire world who seemed to like his cooking. So, this was really the only way he could return the favor. Wujun decided he was going to give Chigak some priceless lessons that all his money could never hope to buy. Chigak, on the other hand, was just getting annoyed that Wujun was suddenly talking down to him and dishing out pointers after he'd already run away from the fight. While the miners' leader watched the battle unfold, he commented that, as usual, everyone had scrambled into the mine. He figured if Kim Chigak took care of the boars, all the iron would be theirs. But the miner also noticed that Chigak wasn't quite living up to his reputation and wondered why his fighting seemed so off. The miner also noted that Chigak's student had booked it a while ago. Wujun corrected Chigak again, yelling that his center of gravity was way off and that he was wasting a ton of energy. Wujun's attitude was really starting to get on Chigak's nerves, especially since he was just lecturing without lifting a finger. Wujun carefully watched every single one of Chigak's moves and told him to use his body more efficiently, since he was wasting too much energy on each spear thrust. Looking closer, Wujun realized that Chigak's movements were all flashy but had no real efficiency. Chigak got more and more furious at Wujun's attitude as he kept slicing boars in half. Wujun yelled at him once more, saying he was moving around too much and putting too much emotion into his spear. Chigak was already getting exhausted from the fight, and when he looked around, he saw that he was completely surrounded by boars. He muttered that they just kept coming, and without any backup, he wasn't sure how long he'd last. Wujun had sized up Chigak's level and concluded that he was a pretty slow learner. Wujun drew his sword and launched an attack from the top of the mountain toward the boars. Chigak felt a massive surge of energy, and before he could react, a devastating attack swept across the area, causing huge damage to tons of boars. Chigak was amazed by Wujun's power to unleash a sword attack from so far away. He figured Wujun had to be an S rank. Before he could even process it, Wujun was standing right next to him, confirming in his mind that Wujun's skills were on a completely different level than his own. The miner who was watching commented that Chigak had been struggling in the fight, but then all of a sudden, something incredible happened. He was convinced that Chigak had taken out all the boars in a single moment. The miner said he'd worked with a lot of B-rank hunters before, but none of them were as amazing as Chigak. He outclassed them all, leading the miner to believe that Chigak had been hiding his true power. Suddenly, a warning window popped up for all three of them, letting them know that the boss was enraged by the massacre of its boar herd. And just like that, it appeared, and Chigak and Wujun were standing face to face with the boss of the Wasteland Dungeon. To show how furious it was, the boss let out a massive roar, filling the area with a tense energy. As soon as Chigak saw the boss was about to charge, he yelled for Wujun to get behind him. As Chigak got ready, he declared that he wasn't going to lose so easily this time. But just as the boar was about to hit, Wujun stepped in front of it and took it down in a single blow. Chigak was stunned as he watched it all happen, unable to believe what he'd just seen. As Wujun was already sheathing his sword, Chigak remarked that he hadn't even seen him draw it. The miner who had been watching said he didn't even see the spear move and wondered if something like that was even possible. He then decided that Kim Chigak had to be a god. The miner guessed that Chigak and his disciple trained alone to avoid attracting attention, but he was scared they might do something to him if they found out he'd seen everything. So, he figured he was 100% toast, since people die in dungeons all the time. The miner kept watching, noticing that Chigak seemed like a good guy for trying to protect his disciple, but he wondered if he was only that nice to his own student. Scared of being found, the miner scurried back into the cave to hide. Wujun noticed that the miner's presence was gone and commented that it was a shame, since he was planning to offer him a taste of his cooking. Wujun mentioned that unlike the skilled assassin, the boss of this dungeon didn't drop any equipment. The spirit girl was thrilled because she had just gotten some high-quality meat from the dungeon boss. Wujun announced that a true chef has to know how to satisfy the hungry and pointed out that the dungeon would close in 6 hours, warning that they couldn't afford to waste time. Chigak complained that they were leaving broke this time because of the worthless monster drops. Chigak guessed that Wujun would use the monster's cores for cooking and thought they might have special effects like last time, but then he remembered he'd have to eat that horrible, disgusting food again. Chego couldn't stop thinking about it. The boss's internal core was worth a cool 300 million. He was stuck wondering which was worse, suffering through a $300 million meal that tasted like garbage, or just quietly slipping away. The second option sounded way better, but financially, it was a terrible move. So, Chego piped up, "Hey, shouldn't we just hang out until the dungeon exit opens?" Wujun, however, didn't even seem to hear him. He was already lost in thought, dreaming up what kind of dish he could create from the boss's remains as he began expertly carving up the meat. Chegok had to admit, the guy's knife skills were straight out of a cooking manga, which led Chegok to wonder, with a sense of impending doom, what sort of culinary monstrosity Wujun was about to create this time. Wujun glanced over, noticing Chegok's intense stare. "Getting excited to see my cooking?" he asked with a grin. With tears forming in his eyes, Chegok managed to reply, "Oh, you have no idea. You're really going to cook right now?" Chegok asked. "That grilled cactus from earlier is still putting up a fight in my stomach." Wujun just shrugged. "Well, we're stuck here for another 6 hours anyway." Chegok sighed. "Right. All because the boss decided to pop in." Looks like we'll be here until dinner, Wujun announced cheerfully, as Cheguk, who had already missed lunch, grumbled about the dungeon's stupid rules. The spirit girl floated over, asking, "Did you finish cutting up the meat? Your technique is amazing." Wujun turned to her, "Hey, could you get me a frying pan? I want to grill a piece and test the flavor. You know, got to make sure it's good before we commit." After searing the cutlet, he took a bite. "Yep, just what you'd expect from a dungeon ingredient," he mumbled. "The texture is totally different." It had a surprising crunch to it, almost like he was biting into a piece of fruit. Aside from that weirdly crunchy texture, Wujun didn't find anything too special about it, though he did appreciate its wild, gamey aroma. After a moment of thought, Wujun snapped his fingers. "I've got it. This would be perfect for a sweet and savory braised pork dish." The spirit girl looked at him, baffled. Braised pork? With that? She was sure it would taste amazing, but she had no clue how Wujun was going to pull it off. "You'll see," Wujun said confidently. "First, I need a steamer." He explained that the trick was to stick pieces of cactus to the meat, put them in the steamer, and then start adding his secret ingredients from his inventory. Cheguk watched as Wujun tossed in some star anise and peppers, figuring he was attempting some kind of braised pork. For a brief, shining moment, Cheguk felt a spark of hope. "I mean, it's real meat this time," he thought. "Even he can't possibly mess this up, right?" That hope died a swift and brutal death the moment he saw Wujun add the cactus to the pot. "I should have known," Cheguk lamented. "I completely underestimated his talent for disaster." Wujun suddenly paused. "Just steaming it isn't enough," he declared. "I know. I'll grill the meat and cactus together on a slab of iron ore. That'll double the flavor." "What is that awful smell?" Cheguk gagged. "How can cooking oil smell like rotten avocados?" Wujun, completely unfazed, just said, "After this gets a nice sear, I'll add some soy sauce and rice wine and let it cook down." The little spirit girl began zipping through the air, shouting, "I can't take it anymore. That amazing smell is driving me crazy." Wujun calmly replied, "It'll be at least 3 more hours." The spirit girl groaned, "3 hours? That's just cruel. How can you make me endure this heavenly aroma for that long?" Seeing Wujun so completely in his element, Cheguk decided the best course of action was to get some sleep. A good while later, the dish was finally ready. Wujun took a small bite to check his work. I put the boss's core in, but it's milder than I expected. I know what'll fix it," he decided, a little queen bee venom. He added the final touch and announced that it was almost ready, all while Cheguk was deep in the throes of a Wujun-centric nightmare. The spirit girl watched Cheguk twitching in his sleep. "What do you suppose he's dreaming about?" she wondered. "He looks so scared." "It's almost time," Wujun whispered, sensing the dish was reaching its peak. "The perfect moment to take it off the heat is now." He lifted the lid, and a massive cloud of fragrant steam erupted from the pot. And there it was, a perfectly prepared plate of braised pork. A series of notification windows popped into his view, detailing the dish's specs and revealing its A+ quality. Just then, Cheguk jolted awake, screaming in tears. "He was trying to make me eat a beehive." He blinked, realizing where he was. "Oh, thank goodness, it was just a dream," he panted. "Can you imagine if that was real? I'd be in so much trouble." His relief vanished, however, when he saw the actual dish Wujun had made. He slapped himself hard across the cheek, hoping to wake himself up, but the stinging pain confirmed this was no dream. "Come and get it while it's hot," Wujun invited with a smile. Cheguk just stared blankly, thinking to himself, "I'm never going to escape this guy." Cheguk tried to compose himself. "Okay, just remember, it tastes like death, but the stats always go up," he reasoned. "This time won't be any different." He recalled the last thing Wujun had cooked for him and had to admit, this new dish looked way better. But from Cheguk's point of view, Wujun was radiating a terrifying aura, and he was certain that not eating was a fatal mistake. He tried one last time to be positive. "It's actual meat this time," he told himself. "It has to be better than eating cactus." But the second he poked the meat with his fork, he heard a distinct crunch and knew something was terribly wrong. "Why is this making a crunchy sound?" he panicked. Braised pork is supposed to be soft, but he knew there was no time for second guessing. He had to eat it to survive. Desperate, he put a piece in his mouth, praying for another miracle stat boost. Instead, he was hit by a tidal wave of pure salt. "This is saltier than seawater," Cheguk thought, his taste buds screaming. "How is it this intense when he only added a little pepper? It feels like I'm chewing on a handful of gravel," he thought in despair. "And why is it both crunchy and slimy like spoiled jelly?" He decided this wasn't a meal, it was a curse, the final curse of the Westland dungeon. But just before he lost all hope, a notification popped up for him. It said he had successfully consumed the boss's internal core, and his overall health had increased by 4 levels. A second notification followed, informing him that his resistance had slightly increased from consuming the boss's meat. Cheguk was floored by the stat jump. For a B-rank hunter, he knew that gaining even one level was incredibly difficult, and building up resistance took a ton of effort and a ridiculous amount of money. It dawned on him then that, if word of this ever got out, this place would be swarming with hunters. He did, however, mention there's a limit to this whole thing apparently. The taste is so unbelievably awful that death starts to look like a pretty good option. Outside the wasteland dungeon, a crowd is gathering. One guy remarks that, just as he figured, tagging along with Cheguk was the smartest decision he's ever made. The young man explains that for 3 years, he's been walking on eggshells with absolutely zero luck, but his reporting career finally paid off when he snagged an exclusive on the Killer Bee dungeon, which is what really put him on the map. A lot of folks were commenting that Chuck must be seriously skilled to have faced 2 dungeon bosses already, and everyone was wondering if he could pull it off again. Then, without warning, the portal flickered open and someone stumbled through. It was a huge surprise to see one of the miners, who gasped that he honestly thought he was a goner in there. The moment the miner stepped out, he was completely taken aback by the sheer number of people waiting just outside the portal. The reporter was shocked to see the miner emerge and scrambled to remember his name. Once he called it out, the miner just asked, "Wait, how do you know my name?" A mob of reporters immediately swarmed the miner, peppering him with questions like, "Did you see King Chuck in there? And what on earth happened inside?" After getting bombarded with questions about Chuck's safety, he held up his hands and told everyone to settle down, promising to tell them exactly what he saw. He then recounted his story, confirming he'd seen King Chuck and claiming the guy was actually an A-rank hunter who'd been hiding his real power. Just then, King Chuck and Jin stepped out of the portal, and Chuck looked around, confused, asking why so many people were there. All of a sudden, news stories about Kimchi Guk were popping up on every major news outlet. Some users were absolutely thrilled, posting things like, "Finally, an S-rank hunter in our country," and Cheg is a total legend. Every headline tried to be more sensational than the one before it, with titles proclaiming Cheguk had cleared the board dungeon single-handedly and was in the top 1% of all hunters. The reporters, still buzzing with excitement, pressed Cheg about what went on in the dungeon and asked if he knew a high-level boss would show up. Chuck just asked them to take it easy and ask their questions one by one, assuring them he'd answer them all. He then apologized, explaining that some questions were just a little too complicated to get into at the moment. Cheg then started to give the reporters his account of what happened. Wujun watched in awe. Chuck was a genius at answering questions, dodging the tricky ones with the grace of an artist. Later, Cheguk was practically glowing with pride, patting himself on the back for how masterfully he'd handled the press conference. He walked right past the reporters, who were still clueless, thinking to himself that even if all this crazy stuff were true, he'd never admit it here. They kept shouting questions, but he just said he understood why everyone was so worked up. Cheg made a point of mentioning that he and his partner had gotten into a tight spot during the raid, but Wujun showed amazing skill and helped them out immensely. He even added that clearing the dungeon would have been way harder if Wujun hadn't been there. Cheg mentioned that as a temporary instructor, he felt responsible for his students, a comment that left most of the reporters completely baffled. With that, Cheguk announced that to protect Jin, he was ending the interview right there. Now, switching over to director Lai Chi, there were 3 life-altering events for him back in the demonic sect. The first was the day he officially joined the demonic sect. The second was when he began serving directly under the sect's celestial demon. All of his experiences had forged him and made him stronger. The former celestial demon once asked him if he'd ever thought about how the Joji dish could be improved. The celestial demon continued, suggesting that a more powerful aroma would really elevate the dish and a better taste would naturally follow. And just like that, the former celestial demon launched into a frantic cooking session. Chaeyoung was fascinated, watching how the man seamlessly blended martial arts into his daily tasks. The celestial demon finally presented his creation, announcing that he felt a little cilantro and some sea squirts would really complete it. Chaeyoung took a hesitant bite and noted that the peppers and cilantro were at war with each other, while the sea squirts were trying to mediate the whole strange affair, resulting in a very bizarre taste. Then the former celestial demon asked him what he thought. Chaeyoung knew he couldn't let the man down, not after this dish was made especially for him. So he forced a huge smile and said with feigned enthusiasm that it was fantastic, all the while thinking to himself, "Just keep smiling so he doesn't see you die inside." But after Chaeyoung declared the celestial demon's cooking was great, a terrible new chapter began, because the man never stopped cooking after that. As time went on, the destructive force of his culinary experiments only grew, spawning terrifying new dishes like tofu, infused with the scent of pork. The celestial demon would always hunt Chaeyoung down for a taste test, much to Chaeyoung's dismay. One day, Chaeyoung finally resolved to tell the celestial demon the cold, hard truth, that his food was awful, and he really needed to stop. But as Chaeyoung was building up his courage, the celestial demon found him, holding out a plate and announcing that he'd made sweet and sour pork with seafood, just for him. At that point, however, Cheon was completely burned out from the endless meals and the constant moral struggle. It hit Cheon one day that the sect leader's cooking had somehow become more toxic than the legendary poisons of the Tang clan. If he kept eating it, he was pretty sure he'd suffer from severe IQ loss. He figured he owed the celestial demon a favor, but he certainly didn't want to lead the sect. It really felt like the heavens were putting him through some kind of trial. All at once, Cheon had a flash of inspiration and began to open a gigantic gate. He decided right then to ditch his physical body, ascend to immortality, and escape this reality for good. He truly believed he was seeing it. The immortal realm he had always dreamed of was right in front of him. But before he could make it a reality, a divine figure appeared and judged Cheon to be a total villain, declaring he could never become an immortal after taking so many lives. The divine being then banished Cheon from the heavenly realm forever. The next thing he knew, he was a baby again, back on Earth, with his new mother trying to feed him. This new world did have one saving grace, though. He had to admit, the sushi was absolutely top-notch. While he was eating, he couldn't help but remember the old sect leader. Cheon reflected that there was no way Wujun could have defeated a C-rank boss all by himself. But then again, Wujun had inherited the martial arts of the sect master. So, if he had properly trained with them, maybe he could pull it off. Cheon wondered why Wujun was keeping his power a secret, but figured he'd just ask him when he came by the office. As if on cue, Wujun was suddenly standing in the director's office, giving him a deep bow. The director told Wujun to cut out the formalities and relax, reminding him they were both alumni. Looking completely laid back, the director asks why Wujun is so wound up and tells him to just speak freely, promising he's a pretty open-minded guy. Cheon muses that kids these days get way too familiar when an adult is friendly with them. They seriously have no sense of decorum. It dawns on Cheon that Wujun isn't showing the slightest curiosity about them being old classmates, figuring it must be awkward talking to an older guy, no matter how intriguing the situation is. So, he just plows ahead, offering to break everything down for him, starting with the martial arts he mastered. He explains that the style he follows is the Blood Demon Arts, which was created by a legendary figure known as the Blood Demon. In contrast, Wujun's style was founded by the one they called the Celestial Demon. According to Cheon, the Celestial Demon was a man with incredibly strong convictions and the sheer power to make them reality. The Blood Demon happened to cross paths with the Celestial Demon, was completely blown away by his vision, and offered to serve under him. Cheon explains that the Celestial Demon's path was tempting, but the Blood Demon was simply more talented, all while Wujun is visibly zoning out. With a booming laugh, Cheon says they're practically brothers, so Wujun shouldn't even try to measure up. People said you could achieve enlightenment just by witnessing the Celestial Demon's techniques, yet most disciples still found themselves drawn to the blood arts. Wujun, completely over this history lesson, thinks to himself that Cheon's story is so over the top that it's just plain ridiculous. Then, Cheon finally reveals his true motive. Getting older has only fueled his curiosity, and now he desperately wants to learn the Celestial Demon's martial arts that Wujun has perfected. Cheon proposes a trade. He'll teach Wujun the Blood Demon arts in return, but admits out loud that he feels like he's getting the better end of the deal. In that instant, Wujun's entire demeanor shifts to stone-cold serious as he says he sees through the whole absurd story. It's obvious Cheon's only goal is the Celestial Demon's martial arts. Wujun says he can't really blame him for wanting it, since practically everyone in the Central Plains would kill to get their hands on his techniques. But, he adds, Cheon is fooling himself with these fantasies and romanticizing the past. It's a bad habit he needs to quit immediately. With that, Wujun rises to his feet, and a dark, heavy aura begins to pour off of him, making the air in the room thick. Cheon is frozen with terror by the immense power radiating from Wujun. Wujun then reveals that he recognizes the director as Dui, which makes the man tremble in fear as he stammers out an acknowledgement to his sect leader. Wujun begins to taunt him, claiming the Blood Demon arts were always stronger than the Celestial arts, even though it was a complete lie that he didn't believe for a second. Cheon immediately starts to backpedal, swearing he never truly thought that and begging Wujun to believe him. But Wujun just keeps the pressure on, coolly remarking that those were his exact words. Still, Cheon kept apologizing, explaining that he was tempted by a rumor about a book, that some idiot tried to trick him, and that he was prepared to accept any punishment. Cheon continued to plead for the sect master's forgiveness. Finally, Wujun let his intense aura fade, saying it was enough. Since Cheon admitted his mistake, he let it slide this time. Cheon profusely thanked the sect leader, but Wujun added that his earlier behavior had been incredibly disrespectful. Now it was time to calm down. Wujun told Cheon to have a seat so they could properly finish their chat. Wujun brought up how the Blood Demon had claimed he would ascend and simply vanish, and the director confirmed it, adding that he was ultimately rejected by the immortals due to some seriously bad luck. Wujun suddenly remembered the celestial deities blaming 30% of his sins on the demonic cult and the rest on his heinous crimes against cooking. He got so lost in the memory that Cheon had to snap him out of it. He then wondered to himself, where in the world did that memory even come from? Wujun pointed out that if Cheon hadn't started lying, he would have never needed to reveal his identity. Cheon apologized again, admitting his greed got the better of him. Wujun just waved it off, saying he was dropping it and didn't want to discuss it further. Cheon couldn't help but notice how happy Wujun seemed with the current world, and he felt a pang of fear that his leader might start dreaming of a world dominated by demons again. After a moment, Wujun asked Cheon if he was free to eat and casually mentioned that he would be handling the cooking. Cheon was so completely shocked by the offer that he was left utterly speechless. Cheon immediately protested that the master's cooking was an honor reserved for those who had made great contributions to the sect, and given his recent mistake, he was totally unworthy. But Wujun just brushed that off, saying that rule only applied back in the sect. Right now, they were at the Hunter Academy. Then Wujun declared with a huge grin that his cooking skills had improved immensely since the old days, so Cheon was in for a real treat. Cheon complained under his breath that he literally tried to ascend just to escape Wujun's cooking, and now he was doomed to eat it all over again. He desperately wished his old companions, Guangma or Cha, were there with him, so he wouldn't have to face this trial alone. But then he remembered that none of the people from the sect he used to eat with were around anymore, not even the elders who basically lived at his place. The horrifying realization dawned on him. He was going to have to face the sect master's cooking all by himself. He reasoned that even if the master's cooking had improved, it probably just meant his dishes had become even more bizarre and terrible. Suddenly, in another place, a shadowy figure informed his subordinate that the killer bee and boar bosses they had been hunting had just been taken down by a B rank named Kim Chiak. He then turned to his servant, Park Sunjin, and asked him if he really thought some guy named Kim Chiak was skilled enough to pull that off. The young man replied that he doubted Kim Chiak was capable of such a feat. He admitted the guy had a little talent, but at the end of the day, he was a B ranker at best. The man noted that Kim Chiak had only even made it to B rank with the Ju clan's backing and was nowhere near strong enough to get noticed by their organization's higher-ups. The boy added that even if Kim Chiak had somehow gotten lucky enough to beat the boss, there's no way he would have had the information to find it in the first place. The man then ordered for Kim Chiak to be put on the watch list and monitored closely, demanding that any new developments be reported to him without delay. He stated that everything was a part of the Eclipse's grand plan before suddenly vanishing from the room. The young man, left alone in the room, was tense and sweating as he nervously added Kim Chiak's name to the surveillance list. Back at the Hunter Academy, Baek was complaining that because of the whole Killer Bee incident, she wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Her father kept insisting it was too dangerous outside, but she thought he was being totally overprotective. Turns out, the real reason she even enrolled in the academy was to get away from her helicopter dad. Anytime she got so much as a scrape, he'd go into full-blown panic mode, calling every hunter doctor on his contact list. A simple scratch on her knee was enough to cause an international incident in his eyes. According to him, her recovery plan involved being under house arrest for the entire afternoon. Later, Baek was scrolling through the news when an article about Kim Chae-guk made her stop and stare. The report was claiming that Chae-guk had been a hidden A-ranker this whole time. It then dawned on her that Shock and Woo-in had spent the weekend running low-level dungeons, and she got ticked off that nobody told her a thing. It stung because they were supposed to be a team, yet neither of them had bothered to ask her along. Still, she couldn't wrap her head around why Shigak was so fixated on Wu Jin. To her, he just seemed like a normal, hard-working hunter. Was Wu Jin actually his apprentice, or was this whole thing just about getting his hands on his cooking? She considered the possibility that after Shigak had a taste of his cooking, he was so blown away that he was now trying to hunt him down for more. Baek vividly recalled that meal it was the one that had basically rebooted her sense of taste, sending a jolt of electricity across her tongue. People throw the word delicious around, but that was something else entirely. Baek had tried all sorts of cuisine but had never felt anything that came close to it again. That settled it. She had to confirm her suspicions. She was determined to find Wu Jin and try his food one more time. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, that guy was definitely one of a kind. Suek watched Wu Jin from across the classroom as the professor lectured about how the more dungeons you clear, the bigger your mana pool gets. Baek could see that Wu Jin was completely absorbed in his studies. A moment later, she glanced at the time, realized she was 20 minutes late for lunch, and took off running. She remembered that ever since the Killer Bee dungeon incident, the official debriefing she was supposed to have had been pushed back repeatedly. With that in mind, she pressed on with her lunchtime search for Wu Jin. In the cafeteria, students were buzzing. Hey, that's Chae-guk right there. And he's with Wu Jin, so the rumors are true. They couldn't, however, figure out why the two were hanging out. Well, one student reasoned, If Wujun is Kim Shik's protege, it's not that weird they're together. But given Kim Chae-guk's notoriously prickly personality, it still didn't quite add up. As he forced down a bite of Wujun's food, Chae-guk thought to himself, this is absolutely foul. He noted the steak had a bitter, fiery aftertaste that was already making his stomach churn. Meanwhile, students at a nearby table were whispering, dude, stay away from that table. The smell is just awful. Finally, Baekhyul managed to spot Wujun in the lunch crowd. He greeted her with a smile, asking, hey, are you feeling all better now? I am, thanks to you, she replied. Without missing a beat, Wujun said, that's great to hear, and offered her a bite of his food, which she immediately accepted. Chuck, who was so over all this, just stared, genuinely questioning her sanity for willingly about to eat Wujun's culinary disaster. As she brought the food to her mouth, every student in the vicinity held their breath. The second she tasted it, her face lit up in pure ecstasy as she sighed, yep, that's just as amazing as I remember. To her, Wujun's food was simply divine. Chae-guk, however, was completely stunned, unable to process what was happening. Baekhyul tilted her head and thought, this one is different, though, she commented. It's a bit weaker. She tried to find the right word, milder, I guess. The food back in the Killer Bee dungeon was like a lightning strike on my tongue, she explained, while this is more like a piglet gently scratching you with its hooves. She then noticed Chae-guk's pain expression and completely misread it, thinking he was actually enjoying the meal. It's all a matter of personal preference, she figured. Baekhyul stood up, thanked Wujun for the fantastic meal, and asked if he would be willing to cook for her again sometime. You got it, he replied. The other students watched the scene unfold, completely bewildered. Could his food actually be good when the area around his table looked like a biohazard zone? But then they saw Kim Chuck wolfing down the food and thought, well, if he's eating it like that, maybe it's not so bad after all. Right then, the spirit girl materialized, chirping, see, you're getting more fans who appreciate your skills. Wujun beamed and said, that makes me incredibly happy. He reminisced about his past life, where plenty of people loved his food, but not a single one ever had the nerve to ask for seconds. He recalled what a shame it was, they'd savor every last bite, but his reputation as the celestial demon scared them into absolute silence. I'm glad it's not like that in this world, he thought. Suddenly, he felt a strange presence. Wujun noted that whoever it was, they were concealing their aura with incredible skill. If he'd been just a regular guy, he never would have sensed it. Inside the gymnasium, he saw Song Jun practicing with a wooden sword. Wujun watched, impressed, as he trained against a swarm of virtual enemies. Looking closer, Wujun saw that the opponents were using everything from spears and swords to bows and more. The simulation even threw beasts and monsters at him. To Wujun, it looked like Seong Jun was preparing for an all-out war, fighting off countless foes all by himself. In the tutorial tower, I only saw the very end of his fight, Wujun mused. But watching him give it his all like this really puts things into perspective. He was finally grasping just how unbelievably impressive Song Jun's martial arts truly were. Wujun decided it was time to leave, thinking it was impolite to watch someone train for too long, and started for the dormitory. Just then, the spirit girl called out, wait, hold on. Look at this. It seems interesting. The spirit girl was pointing at a poster for the Hunter tournament. Wujun felt like he heard of the tournament somewhere before but couldn't quite place it. He just assumed it must have come up in one of his classes. The Hunter tournament was an annual competition exclusively for rookie hunters with under a year of experience. Its format changed every time, which made it a huge hit with the general public. Hunters, who did well in the tournament, could rocket their market value and get famous practically overnight. The grand prize was a spot in the World Hunter Tournament. In Korea, only the top 4 participants earned that honor. Wujun remarked, the rewards are pretty amazing, but admitted, I'm not really interested in joining in. The spirit girl's eyes scanned the prizes and she pointed out an item called a mandrake, which immediately snagged Wujun's attention. I've heard of that, Wujun said. It's a legendary and extremely rare plant. The spirit girl added, it's a mystical herb. She kept raving about how a 10-year-old mandrake was incredible, even when eaten raw, and Wujun had to admit she had a point. She insisted it was the perfect plant in every single way, from its amazing scent down to its taste, and nothing else could even compare. It had this subtle bitterness that really brought out other flavors, making it perfect for pretty much any recipe. You could even just grill it and have it as a main course for dinner. But then Wujun revealed he wasn't going to join the tournament, which left the spirit girl completely baffled. She argued that he had more than enough skill to win the whole thing. Wujun simply explained that the people at the top have all sorts of responsibilities, and he really didn't want to give up any of his cooking time. He also mentioned the tournament was a massive event that would put him in the spotlight, and he'd much rather just keep cooking without all that unnecessary drama. The spirit girl sighed, saying his dedication to cooking was so intense he was like a monk. Even though she already knew this about him, it still made her a bit emotional. Just then, Wujun got a call out of the blue from Guok Qian. Shinon asked if the sect leader had a moment to talk, and Wujun immediately asked what was wrong. Guok said he had something important to discuss with Won and offered to stop by his room if he had the time. Wujun was annoyed, thinking that Cheon clearly didn't understand how things worked here. Having him show up at his room would look really suspicious to everyone else, so Wujun decided he would go to Guoqi instead. He told him he would bring some food over around dinner time and they could meet in person then. Guoqi started to panic on the other end, but before he could protest, Wujun hung up. Wujun could literally hear Guoqi shouting from the building next door and just assumed he was so thrilled about the food that he was making a huge scene. During dinner, Wujun told Xian that after a lot of thought, he'd finally figured out how to balance the dish from the Killer Bee dungeon by adding a little mint. After taking a bite, Guoqi remarked that the taste reminded him of the good old days when blood and guts were flying everywhere. After that, Wujun asked Guok if he was liking it, and he confirmed it was absolutely delicious, a flavor truly worthy of the sect leader. Once they finished their meal, Wujun said they should get down to business and asked what Guok wanted to chat about. Wakiam then asked if Wujun had happened to see the notice boards around campus. Wujun knew instantly what this was about. "You're talking about the tournament, aren't you?" Gu confirmed that he was. Wak went on about how the academy hadn't had good results in a decade, and Wujun could already see where this was going. Sure enough, Qian bowed deeply and humbly asked Wujun to enter the tournament to help boost the academy's reputation. But Wujun shot him down immediately, leaving Guok completely stunned. Wujun simply stated that he was dedicating his life to the art of cooking. Guok's mind raced, thinking that maybe if Mandre was one of the prizes, Wujun would change his tune. Right then, Jen said that if there was nothing else, he was going to head out. But Guok insisted he couldn't give up that easily, reminding him that just getting Kim Chuk to join had already done wonders for the academy's status. Guok figured that if the academy could just get a good showing in the championship, the bureaucrats would have to leave him alone until his retirement. He thought that having Bake Seal participate would probably get them good results, but he knew a single mistake could throw everything off. Gawoka knew that if the sect master was in the tournament, there was no way they could lose. So, he racked his brain trying to figure out how to get him on board, especially since not even the Mandre had sparked his interest. Then he told Jin he had a proposal he couldn't possibly refuse and asked if he was willing to hear it. Gawok started by pointing out that the dorm's shared kitchen was old and tiny, something he was sure Jin was painfully aware of. Jin, who was getting impatient, told Gawok to just spit it out. So Gawok made his pitch. If Jin competed in the tournament and got good results, he would build him a private kitchen right there at the academy. Jin was genuinely surprised by the offer. He admitted this wasn't just empty chatter, it was a legitimately interesting proposal, while Gawok anxiously waited for his decision. However, Jin just said that the offer still wasn't quite good enough. Suddenly, a news report flashed on the TV, announcing that a guild had just cleared a dungeon and found an artifact, which was about to be auctioned off. Jin saw the artifact, which was called the Fire Hammer, and casually added that he'd very much like to have that, too. Gawok was floored by the request, sputtering that an artifact from a high-ranked dungeon costs hundreds of millions. It made zero sense for a guy like Jin, with no ambitions, to want it. Of course, Jin's real motive was that he thought the hammer looked perfect for cracking nuts. The academy students had all been summoned to the gym that morning with no explanation, and they were all wondering what was going on. All of a sudden, Gawok appeared and called for quiet. Wujun and his crew were standing right behind him, which made the students even more curious about what was happening. Gawok kicked things off by saying that everyone in the room was an aspiring hunter. He continued, reminding them that the big hunter tournament was starting in 2 months, while the teachers on the side wondered why he was in such a fantastic mood. Gawok went on to explain that every organization was allowed to send 4 participants and that the academy usually held a very demanding selection process to choose those 4 members. However, he announced this year, 2 students have been selected without any need for tests, Baexiela and Qian Wujin. Explaining his logic, Gawok said that Baexiela had more than proven her abilities in the Killer Bee dungeon. As for Wujin, he had made a huge impact in both the Killer Bee and the Wild Boar dungeons, adding that Chiak could tell them more about that than he could. And on that cue, Kim Shi-guk walked up to the stage to address everyone. Just a few minutes earlier, Chuk had been lamenting on a bench, wondering what he'd ever done to deserve being put through this. In Gawok's office, Chuk had been grilled about whether his recent accomplishments were actually his own, but Gawok quickly revealed that he already knew Wu Jin was the one behind everything. However, Gawok said he was willing to keep his mouth shut, but on one condition. That condition was that Chiak had to get up in front of all the students, explain what really happened in the dungeon, and explain why Baek and Wu Jin were being sent to the tournament. So, up on stage, Chiuk said that he didn't know much about the academy itself, but he could absolutely vouch for the skills of both Baekgil-ha and the student Chien Woo-jin. The students still seemed to be questioning the director's call. Meanwhile, Chiuk was just thinking to himself that if Baek had never come to this academy, he wouldn't be in this mess for all the money in the world. Back in the director's office, Chiuk knew something was up the moment the director started using honorifics to talk about Woo-jin. He was thinking, why in the world would you use formal titles for a student? It just didn't make any sense. But before he could puzzle it out, a reporter practically materialized in front of him, making him jump. The reporter quickly apologized for the jump scare and introduced himself as Kwon Jong-jin, a journalist from the Hunter Division. Chiuk recognized the guy immediately. It was the same reporter from the Wild Boar Portal incident, and Chiuk had been in a particularly foul mood that day. He wondered what he could possibly want now. Chiuk offered a tight smile and said, "I appreciate the interest, but popping up out of nowhere like this is seriously annoying." The reporter, however, had a very important question. He leaned in and asked, "Is it true that you recommended Chien Woo-jin to represent the academy in the tournament?" Chiuk was completely stunned and shot back. "Where on earth did you hear that?" The reporter simply answered, "The news is already all over the Academy Hunter social network." He went on to say that the posts were accusing Chiuk of abusing his authority to get his own disciple into the competition. The irony was, Chiuk didn't really consider Woo-jin his disciple. Chiuk let out a frustrated sigh, realizing the rumor was already spreading like wildfire. He muttered that he couldn't just ignore it, since he had, in fact, officially recommended Woo-jin. But then, it clicked. Chiuk remembered that one of the tournament prizes was a mandrake. He figured, as expected, Woo-jin was only in this for the cooking ingredients. Feeling a wave of relief, Chiuk thought that if Woo-jin was seriously aiming for that mandrake, he would absolutely land in the top 4. With newfound confidence, he turned back to the reporter and said openly, "Yes, I recommended him." Then, with a slightly menacing edge to his voice, Chiuk added, "But Woo-jin didn't get into this tournament because of me." In no time, the news was official. Kim Chiuk's disciple, Woo-jin, was set to participate in the tournament. This unleashed a tidal wave of negative comments about Woo-jin, with people demanding to know who he was and calling the whole thing a massive overstatement. Then, more articles began to surface, speculating that Woo-jin might actually be a dark horse capable of reaching the top 4, and that Chiuk and his student were completely focused on their training. At the same time, Woo-jin was getting a tour of his incredible new kitchen. Gawaki asked him if he liked the setup. Woo-jin just said it was fine, while thinking to himself that after seeing all this, there was no way he could back out of the tournament now. Gawaki asked what kind of changes Woo-jin wanted for the kitchen's interior, and Woo-jin just replied that he'd think about it and get back to him. Gawaki figured that this was a small price to pay, considering the amount of glory the SE leader would bring to the academy. This whole investment made perfect sense. He was convinced no one could hold a candle to the SE leader, and that the other competitors were just amateurs, which made victory a sure thing. Then Gawaki remembered the one last thing they needed, the hammer that was currently being auctioned. He had to get it to finish the kitchen renovation. So, Gawaki promised Woo-jin that he would absolutely get the fire hammer, swearing he would win the bid, no matter what it took. Woo-jin said that everything seemed to be in order and that he had to head out for a class he needed to attend. At that very moment, some students were trash-talking Woo-jin's cooking, doubting that eating it could actually boost your stats. The spirit girl, who was listening nearby, was starting to get really ticked off. Furious, she finally spoke up, saying that they were being rude and needed to show a little more respect for the chef's food, because ultimately, the most important thing is how good it tastes. Woo-jin and the spirit girl made their way to the gym. When they got there, the instructor announced that the last class had been theory, but today's session was going to be hands-on. He added that it was a weapons training class. He told those who were already skilled with a particular weapon to use it, but for anyone who wasn't, he suggested starting with spears or blunt weapons. Suhan declared that he was going to use his fists for boxing practice, and the instructor agreed that it was a good choice, since his physique had improved. Woo-jin picked up a spear to train with, and the instructor noticed, commenting that it was what he'd expect from Kim Chiuk's disciple. Seon watched Woo-jin, thinking that it was completely illogical for a swordsman who could fell dungeon bosses with a single blow to be practicing with a spear. He reflected on how he'd been keeping an eye on Woo-jin from the very beginning, but still couldn't get a read on his true identity. The only things he'd figured out about Woo-jin were his intense dedication to cooking and his habit of using monster parts as ingredients. Seo noted that the spirit girl ate Woo-jin's food with pure joy, and since she was from a grimoire, she must have incredibly high standards. Logically, this meant Woo-jin had to be a genuinely talented cook. But then, Seon was suddenly hit by the traumatic memory of the last meal Woo-jin had made for him. That horrifying taste made him realize Woo-jin had no talent whatsoever. He thought to himself that he'd eaten all sorts of disgusting things just to survive, but compared to Woo-jin's cooking, every single one of them was a delicacy. Sion wondered why Wujun would ever become Chiyook's disciple, remembering that he'd known about Chiyook even before his regression. Back then, Chiyook had only been a B-rank hunter seen as a big deal by the public, but never taken seriously by the top-tier hunters. Sion figured that even if Chiyook had dodged the Slime King's attacks, the outcome of that fight wouldn't have been any different. The dungeon bosses that Chiyook had supposedly been fighting were actually being defeated by Wujun. Still, Sion couldn't figure out why Chiyook was getting all the fame. He initially thought Wujun was trying to stay out of the top-ranking hunters' control, but then he realized Wujun was probably strong enough to crush most of them anyway. He quickly reasoned that Wujun had to be at least an A rank, and more likely was even higher, possibly an S rank or beyond. He then came to the conclusion that he should just keep a close watch on Wujun, but at that moment, he had something far more important on his mind. The Stern auction was set to open in 2 days, and if things played out like they did before his regression, a terrible tragedy would happen there, and he had to prevent it as soon as he could. Sion started to recall that he originally thought it was just a simple bandit attack on the auction, but over time he learned that the group called Eclipse had also been involved. He remembered that the bodies discovered at the auction had been mummified by the spell they always used, and so, Sion concluded that he had fully healed from the injuries he got fighting the Slime King, and that he couldn't afford to just sit around and wait. Wujun, who was standing beside Sion, reflected that holding the spear reminded him of an old friend who was completely devoted to mastering the art of the spear. He was talking about Zhang Yang, the infamous spear demon. Wujun said he tried to knock some sense into the guy, but he was as unbending as the spear he wielded. As Wujun practiced the 7 demon dragon techniques on a training dummy, they couldn't help but think that Shang Ying could have been a true legend if he wasn't so set in his ways. The students watching Wujun were underwhelmed. For all his dramatic flair, he didn't seem to be doing anything special. He just looked like a regular guy. Shanjian thought to himself that the students were complete fools for not seeing what Wujun was truly capable of. Shanjian mused that while the students probably saw random, clumsy stabs, he could tell Wujun was putting his entire soul into every single thrust of the spear. A strike like that could probably rip a hole in space-time, Shanjun realized. The man wasn't just a sword expert, he was a master of the spear too. It made him wonder, what in the world was Wujun? One of the instructors snapped at Seong Jun for nodding off during practice, his voice dripping with disappointment. The Stern Guild was the 5th largest guild, right up there with Samju and Chianik as South Korea's heavy hitters. While Chianik and Samo were known for their military might, Stern was all about financial dominance. Their empire included everything from manufacturing and support services to security and even an entertainment division, starring their most famous hunters. There was a common saying in Korea, if you wanted to get rich, Stern was your fastest ticket, and the jewel in their crown was the Stern auction house. Even with its sporadic schedule and a hefty 500 million won entry fee, hunters flocked to the auction because the items up for grabs were always top tier. With transactions regularly hitting the multi-million mark, security was handled by B-rank and A-rank hunters. That evening, Wujun and his old attendant, Whack, stood before the grand auction house. This should all go off without a hitch, Whack assured him. Truth be told, these events can be surprisingly dull. I don't know, you don't often get a chance to see such rare items, Wujun countered. I actually enjoy watching from time to time. At that, Whack handed him a mask and told him to put it on. Whack explained the policy's grim origins. A hunter once lost a bid and later assassinated the winner. After that incident, they switched to an anonymous, masks-required format for all attendees. Wujun nodded in understanding, noting that it was basically an admission that they couldn't truly guarantee anyone's safety, despite all the rules. The two of them headed inside, where they were stopped at the entrance by a guard who asked to see their identification bracelets. The security guard gave a nod after confirming their entry. The auction is run through these tablets, he explained. Will you need any help with that? They told him they'd be fine. The doors swung open as the guards offered a polite, thank you for coming, please enjoy yourselves. Once inside, Wujun saw that the hall was filled with people, every single one of them wearing a mask. Just as Whack and Wujun settled into their seats, the auctioneers stepped onto the stage and thanked everyone for attending. Now that everyone's here, let's get started, the auctioneer announced from the stage. First up, we have a strand of hair from a Yeti, the snow giant. We'll start the bidding at 100 million. Meanwhile, Whack leaned over and quietly asked Wujun if he remembered how to operate the tablet. All the info on the current item pops up right on the screen, Whack explained, and you place bids using the tablet. You know, a Yeti hair can be used as bait to hunt other Yetis, or even as an ingredient in hair growth potions. Realizing its potential, Whack quickly put in a bid, marveling at how incredible the effects of Yeti hair really were. The auctioneer's voice boomed, the Yeti strand has reached 7.8 billion. Going once, going twice. Sold. No further offers. Let's move on to the next item. While Whack grumbled that his own bid was only 500 million, Wujun was thrilled, noticing all the tempting items on the list. The auctioneer then announced the next piece, a wyvern wing bone, extremely rare to find in such good condition. Wujun daydreamed, adamantium would make for some divine kitchen knives, and a sandalwood cutting board would be just perfect. He quickly caught himself. He was getting way too greedy. If he kept this up, he was at risk of losing what he'd already worked so hard for. And with that, the next item was announced. The Agnes Ness Hammer, an unidentified artifact from an A-rank dungeon, with the bidding starting at 1 billion. Whack and Wujun were laser-focused as the item was revealed. Wujun admitted, just seeing that hammer in person is making my heart pound. After a quick nod between them, Whack placed the opening bid of 1 billion, thinking it might just sell for that price. He knew that 80% of unidentified items usually turned out to have terrible stats. These mystery items weren't very popular since you couldn't appraise them, and there were even some crazy stories about cursed items causing the owner's death. But every so often, one of them would possess an unbelievable ability, which is exactly why the major guilds employed appraisers to research them. The bid is now 2.25 billion, the auctioneer shouted. Whack's mind was racing. If no one in Korea could identify this thing, it might just be a divine weapon with incredible power. But Whack began to sweat when he heard the bidding had already hit 6.8 billion. With a pain grimace, Whack entered his final, desperate bid of 10.2 billion. Just like that, the auctioneer announced, sold. The hammer has been sold. Feeling the sting of the purchase, Whack got an idea. He turned to Wujun and asked if he'd ever be interested in clearing a dungeon with him, mentioning how profitable it could be. But Wujun dismissed it, arguing that it would make him a public figure when all he wanted was to dedicate his life to cooking. At that very moment, the auctioneer announced it was time to reveal the main event of the auction, the item most of them were waiting for. The item revealed was an epic weapon recovered from an A-rank boss, known as the Prison of Fire. Whack noticed the weapon was brimming with mana and offered incredible fire resistance. Plus, with its special ability to convert mana into flames, the wielder would have total control over fire. That weapon was absolutely worthy of its name and would surely go for hundreds of billions. The auctioneer kicked things off. The opening bid is 10.5 billion. The price shot up to 11 billion almost instantly. Bids came in fast and furious, and before they knew it, the item was sold for a staggering 56 billion. Whack sighed, remarking that he was lucky he managed to get the hammer at all. The auctioneer then announced the final item, a scroll found in the Agnes Nest, with an opening bid of 100 million. Whack reasoned that the hammer was made of mithril, which explained its value, but he found it strange that this scroll was selling for such a low price. But, as he mulled it over, Whack felt an odd sensation from behind him, thinking it was just the wind. Suddenly, a huge explosion tore through the center of the auction house. Out of nowhere, two shadowy figures materialized, and one instructed the other to only remember the individuals approved for sacrifice. His partner, Nahimath, gave a quick nod, and they announced it was time to begin. The second an explosion rocked the hall, the auctioneer freaked out and started yelling for the guards. Whack knew instantly they were being attacked. One of the intruders began chanting in some bizarre language, forcing everyone on stage to their knees. The spell's all set, the man announced. His female companion shot back. You do remember what we came for, right? With that, they moved toward the stage, agreeing they just needed to grab the scroll. Right, the scroll. And that one other thing, the woman muttered. But just then, Hunter Dejan charged at them, fists flying. The woman sidestepped his punch with ease. Judging by those moves, you've got some serious magic resistance, she noted, then launched a counterattack. Everything else about you, though, pretty pathetic. The invaders commented that sacrifices are always better when they're in prime condition, and that this one would make for a top-tier offering to the state. Exactly, the girl agreed with a smirk. That's why I only grazed his head. Wujun watched with keen interest. Their techniques are fascinating, he murmured. I'd love to see more. Whack noticed his boss's strange curiosity, thinking to himself, asterisk, we should probably just stay put. Security will handle this any minute now. Asterisk. The woman's partner wondered aloud why they needed to gather so many sacrifices, but she just told him to stay on mission. Suddenly, a squad of guards armed with katanas surrounded them, shouting for them not to move. You idiot, you should have stopped, the man hissed. She shot back. I'm so killing you when we get back. With that, the girl blurred into motion, tearing through the guards, while the man unleashed his dark magic to lock down the security team. Wujun observed that these two were on a whole other level compared to the academy students. They were pulling mana straight from their hearts. He also realized their dark aura was nothing like the absorption technique he knew, which was always limited by the user's own capacity. Looking at the woman, Wujun remarked that he'd never encountered such a purely malevolent energy before. It was like sorrow itself had taken a human shape. You should have held back a little to keep the sacrifices in good shape, the dark-robed man criticized. She just scoffed. Look who's talking. Her partner decided to drop it. Whatever. We just need to get the scroll and the hammer. The moment Whack heard they were after those items, he started to get really antsy. Just then, Wujun stood up from his seat. All right, I'll handle this. Whack's jaw just about hit the floor. He couldn't believe the sect leader was actually stepping in. He just nodded dumbly in response. Turning to his staff member, Whack snapped, "Get everyone rounded up and evacuate, now." As Wujun strolled towards the intruders, Whack thought to himself that they had to be the unluckiest people alive to have pissed off the sect leader. Wujun sounded thoroughly annoyed. "I really didn't want to deal with this, but it's been a while since some fool dared to want what's mine. It's a shame about the lives lost," he added with a shrug, "but that's what happens when you're not strong enough." The dark-robed man was baffled that Wujun could move without a hint of detectable energy. "He's way too overconfident," he concluded, walking right into his own grave. "You focus on the ritual," the girl told her partner. "I've got this guy." Her eyes locked with Wujun's, and in a flash, she was behind him, poised to strike. But Wujun blocked the attack like it was nothing. The girl's eyes widened in panic. She couldn't feel any aura from him at all, leaving her completely bewildered. "Disgusting," Wujun spat, catching her attack with his bare hands and shoving her backward. Harat taunted her. "I thought your whole strength was being merciless." She shot back. "This guy is way stronger than I expected." The girl lunged forward again, unleashing a storm of attacks, but Wujun just kept batting them away like they were annoying flies. A wave of fear hit the intruder. Asterisk. Who in the world is this guy? Asterisk, she thought. Asterisk, he's way too good. Looks like I have to use impurity. Asterisk. Suddenly, a dark aura erupted from her body as black flames consumed her eyes. Watching this unfold, Harat noted, "For her to pull out that power, this isn't a game anymore. Guess I have to jump in." A blast of dark magic shot out from behind Wujun, courtesy of Harat, but Wujun casually deflected it with just his hand. Harat stared in disbelief, completely panicked that his attack was stopped so easily. "My impurity draws power from negative emotions," the girl explained, "and my specialty is the power of despair. It rots an opponent's body and soul." Harat could only watch in horror, unable to process what was happening, as Wujun calmly remarked, "You know, your attacks are on a totally different level than Nemat's." Finally, out of patience, Wujun slammed a devastating blow into Nemat's stomach, sending her flying. Breaking into a cold sweat, Harat stammered, "Our intel said there shouldn't be anyone this powerful at the auction. This, he thought, is a serious problem." He started chanting another dark spell in a strange tongue, confused as to why Wujun wasn't stopping him. For his part, Wujun wished he could see more of their abilities, but it just wasn't worth it. Every time he touched that energy, it just felt gross. Harat was still trying to figure Wujun out when pure terror washed over him as Wujun finally made his move. Wujun had summoned the incredible spear of the fire prisoner. "Don't see why I can't borrow this for a bit," he said to himself. He was impressed. The spear burst into flames just like the legend said. What an amazing weapon. Stunned, Harat could only mutter, "Those flames, they're supposed to be red." But in Wujun's hands, they burned a deep crimson. Whack grinned, seeing his leader with the spear. Now he finally looks like he's taking this seriously. Meanwhile, Wujun took a threatening stance and announced, "Here I come." Then, like a blur, he zipped past Harat, ignoring him completely and making a beeline for Nemat. As he rained down blows on the woman using Chiguk techniques, Wujun thought, "Asterisk, better go easy. I have a lot of questions for her." Asterisk. Nemat's eyes widened as she recognized the style. "What is someone from the Ju Jiang Meiyong family doing here?" she demanded. Wujun just kept up the pressure. "Quiet. I'm the one asking the questions here." He starts calling her out on her motives, and suddenly, Nemat has had enough. She leaps back and yells, "All right, I'm done with this. Stop messing around, Wujun." It hits her that Wujun has been blocking every single one of her attacks without even trying, and his spear strikes are getting sharper by the second. Harap starts winding up another spell, muttering that Wujun has a lot of nerve to challenge them and is just bluffing to look tough. Nemat admits that she always thought the spiral spear technique was flawed, but now she realizes that was just because Chiguk's fighting style was so over the top. She finally understands that the spear's true purpose is to land dozens of serious, pinpoint slashes to finish an enemy. Before she can even act on this thought, she gets hit by a whole barrage of them. She somehow manages to stay on her feet, and when Harap shouts to see if she's okay, she just tells him to get the bottomless pit ready while she buys him some time. Harap thinks they should probably just cut their losses and run, but Nemat insists that if they bail on the mission now, the organization will never let them hear the end of it. That argument convinces him. Harap agrees and starts chanting a new spell, covering Nemat's body in a swirling cloak of darkness. Wujun just watches, looking bored. "Oh, good," he comments. they're finally getting serious. As if on cue, Name It starts to transform, merging with the shadows until she emerges with 6 arms. With her new limbs, she promises Wujun that his death is going to be incredibly unpleasant. Wujun notices she's now covered in a protective black aura as she charges him, swinging her new dark fists. Still, it's no big deal, as he easily parries every single blow with his spear. He thinks to himself that while her physical stats have definitely shot up, she's just charging around like a mindless, angry bull. Wujun then boots her away, telling her that her attacks are just plain sloppy. Absolutely furious now, Naimet screams that even with all her power and the Yaka Temple's buff, she can't land a single clean shot on him. Wujun tells her, "Your fundamentals are a total mess, but you've got great energy control, I'll give you that." Hearing this little piece of praise sends her into a rage. She yells that his arrogance is unbelievable and that she is going to tear him limb from limb. She rushes him again with her wild dance technique, but Wujun just keeps batting away every single attack with his spear, looking unimpressed. Then, with almost no effort at all, Wujun lands a perfect strike right through her, leaving her in total shock. He declares that her power is just sad and that with only her energy control, she never stood a chance. But just then, Harab screams at her that it's enough, telling her everything is finally ready to spring the bottomless pit. Black walls erupt from the ground and surround Wujun. Naimet smirks at him, saying he's going to regret being so cocky. And with that, Wujun is completely swallowed by the darkness of the bottomless pit. Harab starts monologuing that this is his signature technique, which drains an opponent's power and messes with their senses. He boasts that it's a technique he's spent his entire life perfecting, and he's sure that no matter how strong a hunter is, once they're inside, there's zero chance of getting out. Naimet appears right behind Wujun, whispering in his ear, "Having a tough time? You got awfully quiet all of a sudden." She then attacks him with everything she's got, but Wujun dodges it all effortlessly, commenting that this new power-up feels even worse than the last one. Wujun explains that even with his senses blocked, it's child's play to track enemies by their powerful energy signatures. The real annoyance, he figures, is the space itself. This entire dimension is built to drain the life force from anyone inside, and it's already consuming Wujun's strength like a greedy ghost. Musing on it, Wujun has to admit the spell is so nasty that even top-tier fighters would have a hard time with it. Then, out of nowhere, he actually gets hit by an attack. Naimet gloats that Wujun was just acting tough before, but now he's finally starting to feel it. She goes on about how the longer you stay in the pit, the weaker you become. She then asks if he'll give in to the pit or to her first. But before Naimet can get any further into her villain's speech, Wujun is suddenly right in front of her, telling her she's nuts. Having completely lost his patience, Wujun runs her through with his flame spear, telling her to just shut up already. Seeing Naimet get taken down so easily, Harab falls into total despair. He can't believe she was defeated in a single strike, especially after getting a power-up from the bottomless pit. Harab wondered why on earth Wujun wasn't being affected by the pit. He should have been turned into a shriveled mummy ages ago. It was then that Harab noticed Wujun still had tons of energy, and the horrible realization dawned on him. Wujun was trying to destroy the bottomless pit itself. Furious, Harab screamed that this was his unique technique, his life's work. It was impossible for someone to just break it. But as Wujun held his spear, his thoughts drifted to his companion, Zhang Haiyang. He remembered how Zhang Haiyang was always there for him, spear in hand, ready to protect him. Back in reality, Wujun says that even though Zhang Haiyang is gone, his spear is still right here with him. Seeing this, Harab gets even more desperate and starts throwing reckless shadow attacks. Wujun then settles into an offensive stance, announcing that he's going to use the sudden form of the demon dragon, First Palm. In a brilliant flash, he summons a massive fire dragon that completely shatters the darkness of the pit. In the blink of an eye, he's face to face with Harab, asking if he has anything else to show him. Because if not, he adds, "I'm ending this." Harab was so petrified he couldn't even get a word out. Wujun continued, telling him it was over and demanding to know who he was and what he wanted. But Harab's mind just broke. He started praying to the god of chaos, begging his god to lend him power. He kept on chanting in some bizarre language until a dark energy began to leak from his body. He thanked his god for answering his prayer and declared he would offer his entire soul to his master. But before he could do anything else, the power began to consume him, and he started to lose control. Wujun, just watching this unfold, remarked, "Well, this is different from Naimet's transformation. The whole mood in here just shifted." The ritual was finished. The god of chaos had completely taken over Harab's body, announcing that he had been watching the little mortal's efforts. Engulfed by darkness, the Lord of Chaos introduced himself and said he was here to carry out some grand plan. Wujun, however, was just wondering what happened to the original Harab. The Lord of Chaos then took notice of how incredibly calm Wujun was, even in his presence, and said that this trip might have been worth making in person after all. The Lord of Chaos then offered Wujun a deal, swear fealty to Eclipse, and he'd personally juice him up with some serious power. But Wujun shut him down flat, saying he had zero interest in that kind of thing in this life. Totally enraged, the Lord of Chaos declared he was going to force Wujun to submit and unleashed a wave of pure darkness. But before he could even make a move, Wujun had already driven his spear, crackling with massive crimson flames, straight through the Lord of Chaos's chest. The Lord of Chaos finally got it. The mortal had completely rejected his generous offer. As his life slipped away, he sneered that he couldn't wait to see if Wujun would still be so cool and collected the next time they crossed paths. And with that, all the dark energy in the area vanished. Wak offered up a prayer, declaring that the celestial demon should rule for ages and that everyone should bow down to him. Later, Wujun asked Wak, "Hey, you ever heard of this Lord of Chaos guy?" But Wak just said nobody ever asked him to look into it. Wujun figured he'd just have to investigate it himself. He was pretty annoyed that he'd run into the big bad without getting a clue about his real goals. He pieced together that they had crashed the auction to use people for some kind of sacrificial ritual, but he still had no idea where their power came from or what the Lord of Chaos's grand plan really was. Wujun decided they needed to get out of there before a crowd showed up, though he planned to slowly dig into this whole mess over time. For the next several days, the incident at the auction house was the talk of social media. News broke about the death of the supposedly indestructible Dun of Hang, and everyone was asking the same question: who was the heroic masked lancer from the auction? Saiyan, catching up on the news, noted that the future had gone off script yet again. The auction was attacked by both Nahama and the life-sealing Harep, two major players in the whole Eclipse mystery. Seon-jun recalled that even before he traveled back in time, those two were absolute monsters he stood no chance against. Now he was left wondering who on earth could have taken them down. Singh had actually snuck into the auction disguised as a guard to try and minimize the damage. While he was on patrol, he had planted artifacts to disrupt the enemy's magic. In the process, he also quietly took out several dark enemies who could have become major headaches down the road. On top of all that, he had secretly switched the real auction scroll with a fake. Seon-jun was pretty pleased with what he'd accomplished, but he just couldn't get over the fact that someone had managed to eliminate the two most powerful people at that auction. The security cameras caught a clear shot of the masked lancer using the spiral spear, and the media was convinced it was a guy named Chuck. But Saiyan knew the Chuck he remembered wouldn't have lasted even 2 minutes against those two. So, he kept trying to figure out who this masked mystery man who completely stole the show could possibly be. He even entertained the thought that it might be Wujun, but he dismissed it, figuring that with Wujun's obsession with cooking, he wouldn't have been there, and besides, he was way too strong to need a fancy spear technique. But then, something clicked for Sang-John. The Chuck he knew had never gotten past B rank. That was before the regression, though. Now, this guy seemed totally different, proactively taking down Eclipse bosses like he knew their entire playbook before they even made a move. After thinking it through, Saiyan came to a startling conclusion: Chuck had to be a regressor too. In the next scene, Wujun is cooking for the spirit girl, who notes that his meat dish smells incredible, way better than she expected. Wujun moves the broth to another pot, and the spirit girl asks if he's done, but he tells her there's one more crucial step. Suddenly, he whips out the hammer he got at the auction, saying it was the last thing he needed. He's totally admiring the hammer, going on about its great weight and how comfortably it fits in his hand, even joking that if the handle were longer, it'd be perfect for making rice cakes. But, he adds, for today's meal, they were going all in on the bones for a wild boar bone stew. Wujun then starts hammering the bones like a total madman, thinking to himself that crushing them will make the broth way more concentrated and give it a better texture. He has a clear memory of his past life when his disciples would rave about the amazing, crispy texture of his broth. With that, he tells himself he should wrap it up so he can serve the food. But out of nowhere, a series of status windows pop up in front of him. The notifications announce that the right conditions have been met, an unidentified spirit is awakening, and the item is starting to resonate. The spirit girl and Wujun are both looking at the notifications with confusion when a voice suddenly erupts from the hammer, screaming, "No." The spirit trapped in the hammer is furious, yelling that Wujun took perfect material for bone powder, boiled it, and then ground it up. He calls him an ignoramus and demands an immediate apology. Wujun, however, is just completely lost, having no idea what is happening. The spirit girl gets offended when the hammer spirit calls them ignorant for just trying to enhance the flavor, while Wujun simply asks, "Who are you?" The hammer spirit is shocked that they dare call this cooking, but Wujun keeps demanding to know who he is until the spirit finally gives in. He introduces himself as Schmidt, the legendary emperor who once ruled the Black Hammer Empire and a genius blacksmith. Wujun, however, couldn't care less and just goes right back to hammering the bones. This sends Schmidt into a panic, who starts yelling that in situations like this, there's supposed to be more talking. The spirit girl chimes in that it's really not necessary and that he's just weird. She keeps throwing insults at Schmidt, who snaps back that she's nothing but a tiny insect. Suddenly, Wujun starts giving off a seriously dark vibe and tells them both to shut up. Schmidt feels an immense pressure, realizing that arguing with this guy might just get him wiped from existence. The blacksmith explains that it's been 700 years since he started forging a supreme weapon that was meant to go down in history. He's practically crying as he tells the story of how he died in the middle of creating his masterpiece, only to be reincarnated into that very hammer. He then declares that Wujun has the potential to surpass even him as a blacksmith and begs him to hurry up and walk the path of a true craftsman. But Wujun flatly turns him down, saying he's going to live his life as a chef, period. While the blacksmith insists he's wasting his natural talent, Schmidt freaks out watching Wujun shatter the bones, crying that at the very least, he could have made some dwarven armor out of them. The spirit girl argues back that uneaten food is way more tragic than some unrealized dream. And with that, Wujun puts the finishing touches on his high-quality A-rank broken bone soup. Afterwards, just to mess with him, Wujun opens his inventory, making Schmidt think he's about to stir the soup with him, which sends the blacksmith into total despair. Sealbake tries the food and says it's as delicious as it always is. Wujun's system then alerts him that he's completed his daily missions for a whole week, which has unlocked the main quest. Hopping onto the bus, he couldn't help but think it had been way too long since he last headed home. The spirit girl piped up, "Hey, I thought we were going to tackle the main mission," to which Wujun replied, "In a bit. I haven't been back home once since I started at the academy." Wujun mused that even with the memories of a past life, this body had its own deep-seated instincts. Family was just as vital as cooking to him, and now, they could finally get to the main quest, crafting a dish with a B rank or higher. Wujun's eyes widened when he saw the reward list. A dungeon. Pepper? The spirit girl nodded enthusiastically. Yep, it's from a legendary dungeon that's basically a paradise for every kind of pepper imaginable. She explained it was a special culinary dungeon created by her own maker, a master chef who had logged countless phenomenal recipes in his grimoire. The guy was in a league of his own, she said. Wujun was practically buzzing with excitement to level up his own skills. So, he asked, what determines how a dish gets rated? Anyway, the spirit girl laid it out simply. It's a combination of the heart and soul you pour into the dish and the rarity of the ingredients you use. Wujun thought back to his greatest culinary achievement to date, dono pork. No matter how much of himself he put into it, he could never get it past a measly C+. When Wujun finally walked through the door, his mother and younger brother were there to welcome him. In no time at all, his mom was setting a plate in front of him, and the family sat down for a meal together. The spirit girl, also digging in, commented with brutal honesty, "The flavor profile is pretty underdeveloped. This kind of cooking really lacks technique. The seasoning isn't balanced at all," she added. "It's like they're just following steps without any feeling." Meanwhile, Wujun's mother asked him, "Did you miss your mom's home cooking while you were away?" And he simply nodded, "Every day." Looking slightly embarrassed, the spirit girl quickly backtracked. "But of course, a meal filled with a mother's love is always the best." Wujun's mother just smiled and asked how school was going. After they'd all finished, they thanked her for the wonderful meal. Wujun stood up and said, "Mom, you go put your feet up. I'll take care of dinner tonight." Turning to his younger brother, Wujun grinned, "I've been perfecting a brand new dish at the academy." His brother instantly broke into a cold sweat. "I would literally rather go to hell than eat one of your experiments." "Oh, that's so thoughtful of you, dear," their mother praised. "But I have a doctor's appointment, so you boys will have to eat without me." "Don't you worry, it's just a routine checkup," she said, though her brother looked at her with wide, desperate eyes, silently begging her not to leave him to his fate. With that, she glanced at the clock. "It's getting late, I should go. I'll see you both later," and she was out the door. "All right, I guess I'll get started on dinner," Wujun announced. His brother jumped in front of him. No, I'll handle it. Dude, we literally just finished eating. And you're already obsessing over the next meal instead of catching up," his brother sighed. "It's like this cooking fixation of yours has burned away all the warmth you used to have." Shanho thought to himself that Wujun was never this intense before. He briefly wondered if it was a side effect of his awakening, but quickly pushed the thought aside. Then he recalled how their mother might have been the catalyst. Wujun had always enjoyed cooking, even as a little kid, but the day he awakened, that enjoyment morphed into a full-blown obsession. He pondered if Wujun's passion for cooking was similar to his own drive to be a hunter, or if maybe it was just his brother's way of coping with their father's passing. Shanho walked over to his brother. "Hey, I saw on the news that you're Chiek's disciple now. What's that all about?" Wujun just gave a non-committal shrug, making it sound like a baseless rumor. This led Shanho to assume, "So that story about you being in the hunter tournament was a lie, too?" "No, that part's true," Wujun clarified. I made a promise to someone. This only made Shanho's brow furrow with even more curiosity. But Wujun clammed up. Getting stonewalled made Shanho's blood boil. Is this how you treat everyone at the academy? He snapped, remembering the rumors about his brother's freakish culinary creations. Actually, Wujun stated with unnerving confidence, a lot of people happen to enjoy my cooking. Shanho was completely floored. He just couldn't wrap his head around it. As he started to prep a new dish, Wujun said over his shoulder, You'll just have to see for yourself. You'll understand everything after you've had a bite. Looking horrified, Shanho nervously stammered. What? What kind of meat is that? Koji fermented steak, Wujun replied calmly, before launching into a cooking performance full of dazzling flair and pinpoint accuracy. Once the dish was finished, Shanho steeled himself against the anticipated awful smell. He knew he had to try at least one piece, or he'd never hear the end of it. The moment the steak touched his tongue, however, his entire reality was shattered by the incredible flavor. In his head, Wujun thought, I wish I could have used the hammer for this, but explaining that would have been a whole other can of worms. What in the hell did you put in this? Shanho shouted, jumping to a conclusion. Now that you're a hunter, you started using items from dungeons in your cooking. Wujun just smirked and said, Took you long enough. The casual confirmation was enough to completely break Shanho's spirit. Right on cue, their mother walked in. Shanho, I could hear your shouting all the way downstairs. You really are still so immature. But Wujun noticed his mom seemed more somber than usual. Did you get bad news at your checkup? He asked. It's nothing too serious, she replied. But my pulse is unstable. The doctor said I need to close the restaurant and get some rest for a few days. Shanho was quick to agree. Of course, Mom. You need to rest. You've been working for years without a single break. She still looked hesitant, saying, But I have so many regular customers. At that moment, Wujun stepped forward. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of the restaurant. Their mother's face lit up with relief, while Shanho looked on in absolute horror. Standing in front of the restaurant, Shanho asked, Do you even remember promising Mom you'd look after the place? You've never even stepped foot in the kitchen. Wujun reflected internally that Shanho's cooking was a carbon copy of their mother's, which he considered a genuine tragedy. It hit Shanho that it had been ages since he'd last helped out. Okay, he sighed, you get the ingredients prepped. I'll start cleaning. With that, the brothers fell into a rhythm. Wujun's knife a blur as he prepped vegetables while Shanho got to work scrubbing the dining area. Suddenly, their uncles appeared. Hey, where's your mom? Shanho answered. She's recovering from a health scare, so we're holding down the fort for her. Orders started to pour in, with Wujun writing them down and Shanho manning the kitchen. After the last customer left, Shanho was completely drained. Do you think we'll get a break before the dinner crowd? Wujun thought they probably would. Shanho leaned against a counter and marveled. This is exhausting. How in the world does Mom do this every day? With business booming, he figured he wouldn't be stuck managing the restaurant forever. But just then, Siano's stomach did a flip, and he told Wujun he desperately needed the restroom, pleading with him to stay away from the kitchen. And right before he disappeared, Siano made sure to warn Wujun one last time. Seriously, don't go in the kitchen. In another part of town, Guildmaster Lee Jong-gil, also known as Orang, strolled along, thinking he never imagined Da-jan would go out like that, leaving him to scramble for a replacement. He recalled his utter shock watching the auction video where the indestructible Den vanished in a flash. But Orion was busy grumbling about how every single bone in his body ached, especially his back, complaining that it was never an issue when he was younger. Now, though, his age was definitely catching up with him. Still, he had to stick to his routine of checking out the local eateries ever since his favorite spot got wrecked in that gate incident. Stepping into Wujun's place, he noted the old-school but spotless interior, recognizing it as one of those classic joints that probably served amazing food. Wujun gave him a standard greeting, but Oren couldn't help but think the owner looked way younger than he'd guessed, which made him doubt the quality of the cooking. Because of this, he decided to play it safe and order something basic. After he ordered, Wujun just stared at him for a moment without a word before turning away, leaving Iran to wonder about the strange service. The little spirit girl saw this as the perfect chance to show off the chef's real talent. But Wujun, remembering his promise to not cook, felt conflicted about making a customer wait. He figured feeding a hungry patron was the first rule of being a chef, so he caved and headed for the kitchen. Wujun was torn between sticking to the restaurant's traditional recipes and just whipping up the most incredible dish he possibly could. In the end, his instincts took over, and he started tossing dungeon ingredients into the mix, creating a dish that shot up to an A rank. He punched up the flavor with some cactus and fennel seeds, then added a splash of lemon juice to keep it fresh. Wujun later explained how he coated the meat in a viscous fluid that melted under heat, which gave it an incredibly complex taste. He brought the meal out to Orang, already feeling guilty about breaking his promise and knowing he'd have to apologize to Shi and Ho later. The moment Orang took a bite, he knew something was very different. He noticed the meat had an incredibly dense texture and a bitter aftertaste. He thought that if the ingredients were off, there'd be a foul smell, but that wasn't it at all. In fact, the aroma was fantastic. Still, Orang felt a deep sense of unease with every bite, trying to figure out what on earth Win did to this food. As he was voicing his complaints, a status window popped up right in front of him, informing him that eating the dish had boosted his health by 3 points for the next 24 hours. Orang was floored to see the food was infused with dungeon energy, not only raising his health but, more importantly, making his back pain fade away. Around that time, CNO emerged from the bathroom feeling much better, only to spot a customer in the dining area. He immediately saw red when he realized Wujun had gone ahead and cooked for someone, but his anger vanished when he recognized the customer. It was Orang, the head of the Zhang Guild. Shano scrambled to explain the dish that was served, but then he saw that Orang was actually smiling. Orang walked right up to Wujun and introduced himself as the guild master, saying he was just going to cut to the chase. He offered to hire Wujun as the guild's private chef and buy the restaurant outright, promising to make it more than worth his while. Shano was completely stunned by the offer, while Lang thought to himself that he'd never even heard of food that could provide stat buffs, and knew he had to keep the Chi and 8 guild from finding out. He knew he had to move fast before they caught wind of Wujun. First, though, he had to figure out if the restaurant itself was special, or if Wujun was the real secret ingredient. Wujun was tempted by the deal, but his dream was to let lots of different people enjoy his cooking. The spirit girl sighed, thinking that someone had finally seen his true potential. Wujun explained that the restaurant actually belonged to his mother, so selling it wasn't up to him. Plus, he had a more important main quest to focus on. He recalled that his mission called for a B-rated dish, and the spirit girl had told him the rating depended heavily on how rare the ingredients were. Back in the classroom, the professor announced that it had been 2 weeks since the semester started, so everyone should be settled in by now. He then dropped the news that their first exam would be on August 20th, but assured them it wouldn't be too brutal since it was their first one. He broke it down for them, 10% for the written portion, 30% for mana control, and a whopping 60% for hunting an E-rank monster. He quickly added that the monster hunt would just be 3 magical illusions to calm everyone's nerves. A wave of whispers went through the class at the mention of the E-rank monster hunting test. After all, Wujun was the only person in the room who had ever actually done something like that. Meanwhile, Wujun was just thinking that if he wanted to make truly top-tier dishes, he couldn't rush the process. Just then, Bag Seal came over to chat, asking him how he was feeling about the exam and suggesting they ask Chiok for some pointers on mana manipulation and monster hunting. Then, looking a bit flustered, Vake shyly asked if Wujun happened to be free that weekend and invited him to a study session. Wujun appreciated the offer and wanted to repay her kindness, but he had to turn her down, explaining that he already had weekend plans dedicated entirely to cooking. Bake was understanding and suggested they just grab lunch together that day instead. Wujun gratefully accepted, saying how much he appreciated that she actually liked his cooking, which made the other students listening and do a double take. The professor then cleared his throat, reminding them that their last training used holograms and revealed that their trap awareness was seriously lacking. Because of that, he had decided it was time for some more extreme training. He explained that while traps are a staple in dungeons, there's something even more fundamental to them. With a grim look, he announced that the class would now be learning about poisons by eating poisonous herbs firsthand. His logic was that building up their awareness of poisons would naturally make them more cautious and better at spotting traps. The students balked at the idea of eating poisonous plants, grumbling that a whole class period on this seemed like a massive overreaction. The professor clarified that these herbs were from low-level dungeons and, in a pinch, could be eaten for survival since their toxicity wasn't that high. He warned them that after eating one, they could expect their tongues and fingers to swell up, with the effects lasting about 3 to 5 minutes. One student spoke up, challenging the professor by saying that even if the effects were minor, poison was still poison, and a bad reaction could be fatal. The professor just stared at him with a deadpan expression and told him to go on. So, this one student piped up, declaring that the whole poison lesson was pointless because, obviously, everyone already knew all about it. The professor, looking totally over it, shot back that this same genius had managed to set off 11 traps on the last test. And he wasn't alone, most of the class had stumbled into at least 10. He then asked the student if he was actually serious, pointing out that if this were a real dungeon, the entire class would be ghost level by now. Clearly exhausted, the professor asked if there were any other complaints. When all he got was crickets, he just carried on with the lesson. Sean Jun, casually chewing on one of the herbs, mentioned he'd had a rough time after accidentally eating it once. Bake Seal tried a piece too, noting that for a poison, it didn't really taste like much of anything. Yeah, basically like eating grass. Wujun, however, was sampling Arcus saffron and thought it had a great smell, figuring it could be awesome for cooking. It got him thinking. He'd been planning to go ingredient hunting in some new dungeons, but one thing after another kept popping up and he had to put it off. So, Wujun suddenly asked the professor if he could take some Arcus saffron home, but the professor flatly refused, saying it was against school policy. Seeing Wujun look so crushed, the professor wondered how in the world he ever cleared the tower. Just then, though, Wujun's system helpfully popped up a notification telling him exactly which dungeons had Arcus saffron. It's almost like the system is a mind reader. Wujun scans the list for an E-ranked dungeon and pinpoints one in the tropical forest, which, funny enough, is the same place he nabbed that golden frog. Once they're inside the dungeon, Chiuk sighs that after a long, hard week, a golden weekend is finally here. He had plans, so he's not entirely sure why he's here. Chiuk starts complaining to himself that Wujun is always dragging him off somewhere, wondering if the guy has any weekend hobbies besides this. Then it hits him. Wujun has been picking saffron nonstop since the moment they got there. Chiuk remembers that if you prep this stuff the right way, it can be used as a paralytic agent. But what's really bugging him is that Wujun is hoarding all of it, and he has a terrible feeling it's destined for one of his ungodly recipes. The whole thing has him completely baffled, and he's starting to get worried a boss is going to pop up, which would just let Wujun steal the spotlight all over again. Then again, maybe this could work in Chiuk's favor. A big flashy fight might just be enough to make everyone forget about that whole embarrassing mysterious Lancer thing. Even so, he can't shake the feeling that something is just wrong. A deep, primal fear bubbles up. He might have to eat Wujun's cooking again. Bake, who's tagged along, figures Chiuk is trying to hang around her because she's Dujang's daughter. But looking at him now, it's pretty clear his real obsession is Wujun. Her conclusion, Chiuk must have genuinely accepted Wujun as his disciple, even though it's not something people are really talking about yet. She remembers reading some articles that made it look like Chiuk was genuinely looking out for Wujun, so it all seems to add up. Right then, a giant frog ambushes her. She lands a clean, perfect strike. But something's not right. And just like that, the frog gets swallowed whole by an even bigger monster that was hiding right behind her. In a flash, Chiuk appears and wastes the monster, then tells Seal Ha she needs to focus more on her rhythm and follow through with her swings. Bake thanks Chi-guk for the tip, and he just tells her to take a second to breathe. Wujun, who was watching the whole thing, notes that Bake's fighting lacks conviction. He can see the hesitation in her blade, and it all comes down to a lack of self-confidence. He knows you can't just talk someone into having confidence. It doesn't work that way. But the moment she truly believes in herself, her natural talent will skyrocket her past her current limits. For now, Wujun decides it's best to just observe. Chiuk, on the other hand, is getting nervous and wondering when they're finally going to leave, convinced a boss is about to crash the party. What's also weighing on Chiuk's mind is the terrifying thought that Wujun is definitely going to cook tonight. But hey, if it boosts his stats, he figures he can probably stomach it. He's never heard of food increasing someone's stats before. And if Wujun somehow has a unique skill that lets him do that, it would be completely insane. Thinking about it that way, he almost convinces himself he can handle it. Then he has a flashback to the last meal and immediately decides, nope, not worth it. Chiuk just doesn't get Wujun's whole cooking fixation. But when he glances over, he sees Wujun literally drinking poison straight from a vial and immediately shouts at him to stop. Wujun just looks surprised and says, but it's actually really good. At that exact moment, a system notification pops up. You have successfully extracted snake venom. And that's when it hits Chiuk. He was an absolute fool to expect edible food from someone who casually sips snake venom like it's a soft drink. Totally jazzed, Wujun gushes about how incredible the venom is. He describes it as having this salty aftertaste that really sticks with you, saying it's nothing like killer bee venom. In that instant, inspiration strikes, and Wujun has his next recipe figured out. He's positive it's going to be B rank. So, he announces it's time to leave. Beck and Chigak are just stunned, wondering why he isn't just going to cook right there. Sayla gets all antsy and asks how long it'll take to make. Wujun tells her he should be done by the next night and he'll let her know. Chiuk, still totally confused about bailing on the dungeon early, groans that now he has to see the guy again tomorrow. Then the horrifying truth sinks in. He's stuck with him for the entire weekend. So, the night of the big dinner arrives, and everyone meets up in the academy's cafeteria. Chi-guk immediately starts planning his escape route because the meal looks bizarre from every possible angle. Bake Seal cheerfully asks if he's excited too, which makes him seriously question her sanity. Then it dawned on Chiuk. The only reason Wujun went to that dungeon was to gather saffron for whatever this monstrosity was. He looked around and realized he wasn't alone. There were other victims present, all just waiting to suffer the terrible fate of eating Wujun's food. Bake started eating, and when Chiuk saw she was actually enjoying it, He wondered if she had an iron stomach before finally asking her how it was. She told him it was amazing, and that the noodles left a weird tingling feeling on her tongue, which only made Chiuk more nervous about taking a bite. Still, that potential status boost was a powerful motivator, so Chiguk psyched himself up to eat it, reasoning that plenty of great dishes smell awful. The second the food hit his mouth, however, it felt like a lightning bolt shot through his entire system. He described each spoonful of broth as a literal lightning strike to his tongue, saying the whole experience was pure torture. Bake, completely curious, asked Wujun for the recipe. He happily explained that his inspiration was the Japanese noodle dish, tantan. Wujun went on to explain that he used saffron and a few other spices to balance out the acidity from the noodles, then added ground wild boar to give it more texture. Bake totally agreed, exclaiming she could taste the zapping sparks. Wujun mentioned he'd use refined snake venom for a salty kick, but he seemed genuinely shocked that anyone was even curious about his cooking, insisting that the real joy of eating is in embracing the profound mystery of the dish. Chiuk was floored watching Wujun and Bake act like this was just another meal, muttering to himself that those two were definitely made for each other. But what really got to Chi-guk was the fine print. He had to eat every last bite to get the status boost. So, he made a game-time decision to just gulp it all down at once and completely ignore the taste. Once he choked down the last of it, he proudly announced that he'd survived electrocution by noodle, and he'd done it all for the stats. Only, something wasn't right. The seconds crawled by, but no status window popped up. It slowly dawned on him that this was an exact replay of the last disaster. Wujun noticed Chiak had polished off his plate, and right next to him, Bake was thanking him for the delicious meal. All the while, Chi-guk was having a meltdown about his missing status boost, which is when he learned that only A-rated dishes or better actually give you a stat increase. With that sorted out, Wujun officially cleared his first main mission, which unlocked. Mission number 2, an ingredient hunt in the depths of an underwater cave. Wujun grumbled that after all that work, refining snake venom and spending all day on the dish, he still didn't manage to get an A rank. The spirit girl could only agree that it was a total bummer. Those dungeon peppers should have been the key to an A rank. But Wujun realized the pepper's flavor just didn't vibe with the saffron, ultimately weakening the whole dish. Even though he was still curious about the dungeon pepper, he knew he didn't grasp its true potential yet. Using it like that felt like a blow to his pride as a chef, which is why he ultimately decided against adding it. So, Wujun made up his mind not to touch the dungeon pepper again until he completely understood its properties, feeling that just leaning on it would make the dish feel cheap. The spirit girl assured him she had faith in his skills, but she also pointed out that the pepper came from the rarest of materials, and it would take ages to truly master it. Wujun wasn't worried, though, saying he had all the time in the world to figure it out through simple trial and error. Wujun took another look at his main mission, figuring ingredient gathering is pretty standard for a chef. He then noticed the reward was a fermentation storage unit. The spirit girl quickly pointed out this was no ordinary storage. This thing actually worked while it was sitting in his inventory. She explained he wouldn't need a real-world spot for fermentation anymore because the storage unit automatically handled all the temperature and humidity adjustments for him. It finally clicked for Wujun, and he was ecstatic. Items in his inventory would keep their normal size, and now he could ferment them on the go. He was about to head out right that second when Chiguk suddenly appeared, asking Wujun if he even knew the definition of a break, since this was the third day in a row he'd summoned them. Chiu grumbled to himself that they hadn't even found the final boss yet, and the last dish just gave him a 24-hour-long bathroom trip. He seriously just wanted a day off. He remembered his master pushing back their talk about him taking on a disciple, instead ordering him to use Wujun to divert attention from the auction incident. Chiguk knew his master meant the masked lancer, but for the life of him, he couldn't figure out why everyone thought he was the guy. Then he watched the security footage and was completely stunned. The lancer's fighting style was creepily similar to his. He decided it was probably best to just stay quiet. Chiu came to the conclusion that his master genuinely had no idea who the masked lancer was. The problem was, even he couldn't name anyone else who could use a spear like that. Sighing, Chiuk accepted that he was cornered. A small part of him even started to wonder if he was somehow connected to it. Desperate to stall for time, Chiuk asked Baek if she was tired, rambling about how too much exertion isn't good for you. She just said she was totally fine. He was silently fuming at her answer, but kept a straight face and just suggested they get going to the cave Wujun had mentioned. Chiguk mused that he was stuck in a crew of freaks with bizarre tastes, and the only reason he'd survived this long was the status rewards. Chiuk remembered the last outing being even worse than the meal itself. He figured with a crowd this big in the underwater cave, there was no way a hidden boss would spawn. So, his new goal was simple: focus on fixing his public image. As Wujun told everyone to get a move on, we see another party battling a long-legged crab on the seafloor. This other party was getting totally wrecked, they didn't have a healer and were taking a beating from the crab. Suddenly, the creature was sliced right in half, marking the grand entrance of Wujun's team. One of the knights apologized for losing the monster's attention, but Chiuk just calmly told him there was nothing he could have done to stop that attack. Shiguk had gotten plenty of apologies from hunters with lower ranks before, but something about this one felt strange. Then, stunning everyone, the knight actually asked Shiguk for his autograph. In that moment, Shiguk realized his reputation had absolutely exploded. He coolly replied that he didn't have any paper on him, but he'd be sure to remember for next time. The other hunters started talking about whether a boss might show up, but the consensus was that if there was one, someone would have found it by now. Still, they all agreed that if a boss did pop up, Kimchi Guk would know what to do. They were also amazed by the discipline of Baek and Chuk, and admitted they were jealous of Wujun for seemingly being treated so well by them. Wujun, completely ignoring the chatter, was already lost in thought about his next meal and how he was going to make it absolutely perfect. Chiak was loving the recognition from the clan and the boost to his reputation, but he couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease since it was all because of Wujun. He was terrified that Wujun might just wake up one day, decide to spill the beans, and tell everyone that he was the one who'd been taking down all the hidden bosses. Chi panics, picturing his life crumbling in a single moment and getting booted from the clan on the spot. He figured if he could just become stronger than Wujun, all his problems would disappear. But to do that, he'd need to learn his clan leader's ultimate secret technique, the Galactic Meteor Spear. And so, he resigned himself to keep playing along with Wujun for now. Unfortunately, that also meant he had to keep choking down Wujun's god-awful cooking and pretending to like it. All of a sudden, Wujun and Baek, who were up ahead, came to a dead stop, making Chiuk ask if something was up. Baek was just as clueless, saying that Wujun just stopped out of the blue, while Wujun was silently staring at a patch of rocks. Because on those rocks, his system was flashing a warning, indicating the dungeon was right in front of them. Wujun figures the boss's location has to be in the dungeon log, which means the entrance must be hidden somewhere in these rocks. He spots a magical barrier covering it, a first for him. Well, this is interesting, Wujun thinks, noticing that while the barrier is different, it functions a lot like the illusions and formations he's used to. He briefly considers just smashing his way through, but that might risk messing up the boss encounter. Deciding on a smarter approach, he analyzes the barrier and confirms his hunch. It has an incredibly thin structure. He notes that it's as intricate as a formation, but with a much more delicate touch. With pinpoint accuracy, he gently pinches a section of the barrier, musing that a single weak spot could bring the entire thing crashing down. The second the entrance to the dungeon is revealed, everyone is completely stunned. Chiguk is in disbelief, certain the portal just materialized out of thin air. He thinks to himself that there's no way just standing still could have been the trigger. Wujun, however, wastes no time and dives straight into the portal as the others yell at him to hold on. Having no earthly idea what's on the other side, Chiuk and Baek sprint to follow Wujun, but they're violently thrown backward the moment they touch the portal's edge. A system notification pops up, revealing that the maximum number of entrants for the dungeon has already been met. Chiuk is confused about who else could have possibly gotten in before realizing it was only ever meant for one person. Inside, Wujun is already marveling at his new surroundings. He notices that even though he's clearly underwater, he can breathe perfectly fine, and moving around feels just like it does on dry land. It dawns on Wujun that this is his first time ever seeing the ocean. In his previous life, he had only known the mountains. Taking in the scene with its endless fish and sea creatures, Wujun thought it looked like a mysterious and beautiful painting. He then started to wonder where Baek and Chiguk had gotten to. The spirit girl suggested they might be worn out, since they'd mentioned it earlier. Wujun remembered it had only been 2 days since the last dungeon, so they were probably running on fumes. He decides he'll make it up to them by cooking something absolutely amazing for their next meal. The spirit girl was totally captivated by the underwater view, exclaiming how extraordinary the scenery and the fish were. Wujun, meanwhile, was already spotting useful items like Scorpius seaweed for armor and Arachnia shells for temporary fire resistance. Wujun was pleasantly surprised to see a ton of seafood that could double as ingredients, but there wasn't a trace of his actual target, the limitless fisher. A moment later, Wujun casts a spell that lets him see for miles, and it isn't long before he pinpoints his target's location. Wujun mentioned that he could feel a familiar energy within 10 miles, so he decided to head that way. But just then, a figure appeared out of nowhere, launching a direct attack at Wujun and demanding to know who he was. Wujun observed the man's fluid movements, noting that he could hide his presence without any advanced skills, which meant he was a true master. Wujun wasn't sure if it was another hunter at first, but then he recognized Jo Seong-jun, who looked absolutely determined and ready for a fight. Completely shocked, Song-jun demanded to know what Wujun was doing down there. Wujun just played it cool and apologized for startling him, saying he'd taken a wrong turn. Seong-jun couldn't believe his ears, someone getting lost in a hidden dungeon, especially a guy like Wujun. He instantly figured out that Wujun was also after the Jewel of the Sea, just like him. He explained that in order to break the scroll he'd nabbed from the auction, he absolutely needed that Jewel of the Sea. He'd already thought it through. To use the jewel without any nasty side effects, he'd have to create a spirit stone, and was just getting ready to ingest something for the process. Song Jun had even used a special artifact to change how he looked, never imagining for a second that he'd run into Wujun down here. He then decided it was better to meet Wujun like this instead of as himself, and thought with a smirk how unfortunate it was that this young man had lost his way. Seong-jun was doing everything he could to play it cool, knowing he couldn't let Wujun get away like last time in the Slime King's dungeon. He remembered that the Limitless Fissure had a territory of about 500 meters, so a confrontation was unavoidable. The group known as Eclipse had apparently already made a run for the Limitless Fissure but couldn't even manage to get close to its domain. Song-jun noticed the dungeon was completely undisturbed, leading him to believe that the members of Eclipse must have met their end here. He was worried about Wujun, who could probably capture the Limitless Fissure without breaking a sweat. This got him thinking about how he could possibly bait the creature himself. And right on cue, Wujun mentioned he was going to be on his way. As they parted, Song-jun saw that Wujun was heading directly for the Limitless Fissure's territory, and he couldn't help but grin, thinking things were shaping up to be easier than he hoped. Seong-jun was sure Wujun would run into the fissure any second, but then a warning suddenly flashed, announcing that someone had entered the creature's territory. Wujun felt an aura that was powerful enough to rival a divine creature's. He decided to watch from a distance, thinking this might get interesting. But then the very same warning popped up for him. Before he could even react, Wujun was face to face with the Limitless Fissure, a B-rank boss. Wujun was completely floored, having never laid eyes on a fish that enormous before, and admitted that it certainly lived up to its name. He noticed tattered bits of clothing stuck in the fish's teeth, which led him to guess that the previous visitors had fought it and lost badly. The spirit girl got incredibly excited when she saw the fish's spines, saying they were a top-tier delicacy. Wujun joked that he thought she was a bit more proper, but she just declared her undying love for seafood. Following that, Wujun asked her what kind of dishes she preferred, and she immediately replied that she'd happily eat anything he made. Still trying to decide on the menu, Wujun mused that sushi or sashimi would be fantastic, but he couldn't rule out a good steamed dish either. At that moment, the giant fish finally lost its patience and charged into attack. Wujun felt the incredible pressure of its aura, but he dodged the attack without any effort at all. He thought that its aura felt weaker than what he was used to, but then he sensed the same corrupted energy he felt at the auction. Wujun quickly pieced it together. The energy was coming only from the fish's mouth. He came to the conclusion that the Eclipse members must have been eaten by it. Wujun now understood that not even a high-level hunter like Chiyu knew about this group. They had kept their identities secret while killing people for more power. The fish shot a bolt of lightning from its mouth as an enraged Wujun condemned the cult as disgusting, sad that its victims would never get to enjoy good food again. As he weaved through the attacks, Wujun realized he'd underestimated them at the auction. He promised himself that if he ever crossed paths with them again, he would show them absolutely no mercy. Then, out of nowhere, Wujun flips the script with a slick counterattack, using his custom spiral spear and the celestial net to make quick sushi out of the giant fish. After the fight, he's a little underwhelmed, thinking the celestial net didn't have quite the oomph he was hoping for. He makes a mental note to give it a serious upgrade down the line. Just when they think it's all over, the ground starts to violently shake. Wujun totally freaks out, yelling that you're not supposed to get earthquakes after the dungeon boss is already toast. He immediately starts whipping up a huge spell, sending shockwaves of power across the whole area, leaving the poor spirit girl looking on with total confusion. All the while, Wujun realizes the earthquake won't stop because the dead fish's energy is just fizzling out instead of stabilizing the area. With the monster finally gone, Wujun takes a look at the item it dropped, casually thinking that this is just business as usual in this world. But something feels off. He normally doesn't pick up on this kind of bizarre energy when monsters become items, which makes him think someone's meddling behind the scenes. The problem is, he has no clue who or what it could be. This whole situation gets Wujun really curious about his brand new item transformation skill, so he decides he's got to try it out right away. Before he gets the chance, though, a system notification pops up announcing a request for a chat. The second Wujun taps. Except, a glowing white portal materializes right in front of him. The spirit girl is absolutely floored by its appearance, stammering that she's never ever seen anything like it in her entire existence. The system then clarifies that only authorized folks can go through the portal, and doing so will completely consume the fish's core. Wujun notices the weird, ominous energy disappeared the instant the portal opened. His spirit companion, on the other hand, warns him not to go, stressing that the most dangerous thing in any dungeon is the unknown. But Wujun just shrugs her off and announces he's going in. However, just as Wujun moves to step through, An invisible barrier violently throws the spirit girl away from the entrance. Wujun then tells her to just wait there, since he already figured only authorized personnel could get in. And that's where our video is ending for today. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Catch you all next time. Bye bye.